Okay, thank you for coming to this event. It's my pleasure to be able to start formally this activity. This activity originally was pushed by the European Commission, but when we tried to start this activity and we offered this activity to the GEOSS Secretariat, we discovered what was obvious. That apart from Europe, there are other places where they are doing citizen science. So, and then we started some telcos, and we organized this event together. And this is really good because we are making this broader. It is not completely good because now we see that even the description of the task that we have in the web needs to be adjusted a little bit. But that's part of what we are going to do today, probably. Understand better the objectives of this group, the capacities of this group, and then have an agenda on how we can move forward in introducing citizen science into the GEOSS mainstream. So this is what we are going to do. The program, you have it, this is very well organized, so you have a piece of paper in your chairs where you see that essentially there are 3 blocks. We want to start soft, so we have lightning talks, so short talks. The presenters has promised 5-7 minutes. Then we have some discussions, and after that we will have the panel that again has some presentations and discussions. And during that we will think about, we will be inspired by those presentations, and we will think about these topics that really need to be addressed in this group. And we will list them, and we will try to sort them, give them a priority, and then think about telecoms and new meetings and this stuff to come this group into life and not limited it to a description in a web. So thank you for coming, and I would like to invite you directly to the first block. So Leah, please. Okay, help me with that.
All right, thank you everyone for coming today. Secure World Foundation is joining several other sponsors, and as Juan just said, we have tried to create a dynamic presentation for you. So we have a variety of interesting projects that are going to be highlighted, as well as some thoughts by some preeminent experts on this topic about what is the way forward. So I'd like to do one more welcoming remark, and I'd like to invite our Executive Director, Mikkel Simpson, who has been a part of the Geo World for quite a number of years, to say a few words, and then we will get started with our lightning talks.
Thank you, Crystal. Well, the program that we have presented to us starts off by saying that the growth of citizen science is a global phenomenon, and I don't think any of us would challenge that, but it is important to keep in mind that growth does not imply new. Citizen science has been a part of the human experience for a long time. Anybody that's had the chance to see some of the traveling tours of Leonardo da Vinci's sketchbooks realizes that in addition to some wonderful drawings of portraiture, there are also aerodynamics and anatomy and hydrodynamics that obviously fascinated him well enough to have actually made significant progress in that area. Da Vinci was an artist, and so I think we would have to say his science was citizen science. I think we also need to keep in mind that you don't have to be my age, let's say, to be a citizen scientist. I don't know if you followed the recent news, but there's a fascinating piece of news out about an upcoming article in the Journal of Solar Physics that details the discovery in 1886 by a 17-year-old citizen scientist, Juan de Aguilar, in Spain, of a solar flare that he actually managed to sketch and about which he had a paper accepted in the French journal Astronomie in that year. No PhD, no university degree yet, but clearly a citizen scientist. I remember the first time that citizen science sort of grabbed me as a real possibility. It was when a group of faculty came to me when I was president of the International Space University, proposing a project that they wanted the students to work on in 2009 during the Space Studies program. The program was nicknamed DREAM because it was something of an acronym for Disaster Risk Evaluation and Management. And it was all about coordinating space observation with citizen use of smartphones and photography of that generation, with the needs of the World Bank for being able to ground truth the risk that certain building projects faced from a geographical perspective. That team project ultimately was completed with some extraordinary expertise help from the World Bank, and it opened my eyes to this idea that we absolutely should not eliminate this resource of curiosity, capability, and increasingly infrastructure that supports citizen science. From the standpoint of GEO, keep in mind that the Mexico City Declaration, among many other comments that could be seen as supportive of citizen science, asked us to resolve that we would increase the base of stakeholders that were contributing to the GEO mission. No better way to increase the number of stakeholders than to involve them in the mission. Those of you who've taught have probably realized that you can excite classes more with questions than you can with data or answers. The strategic plan for GEO calls on us to use our convening power to bring together those who can turn information into knowledge. Well, GEO has had an extraordinary professional community of such people, but all of them seem to recognize that the job is just too big, the resources are just too small. Reaching out to people who can do bits and pieces, and maybe even large bits and pieces of this work, is extraordinarily important. So as under this GEO plenary we seek to find insight for a changing world, citizen science can be a very important tool. And I just leave you with one last thought, that we should not forget another interesting citizen scientist who eventually became a professional scientist. Albert Einstein received his PhD in 1905, which also was the wonder year in which he published 4 papers that radically changed the basis of physics while he was a clerk in a patent office. So we have a lot to thank citizen sciences for. Thank you, and enjoy the session.
So we'd like to thank the GEO Secretariat for allowing us to host this workshop. We also want to show appreciation for the 4 organizations that helped to co-organize this event, including CREF, Secure World Foundation, the NSF South Big Data Innovation Hub, and the Wilson Center. So Crystal, Anne, Juan, myself, and several others who've been very helpful today. We also want to bring to your attention, those watching the live stream, that you can tweet your questions. We will have someone here who will be monitoring the Twitter feed. We'll call out your questions to the panelists for us. Use hashtag GeoCitSci, so GeoCitSci, GeoCitSci. And I think there's also a hashtag for the larger GeoPlenary, is it hashtag GeoWeek? GeoWeek 17, yes. So with that, I'll get started. So we began the session on lightning talks. So think about if you had 100,000 people to help you with your work, what would you do? Right? What is crowdsourcing? So we want to talk a little bit about, so we're all on the same page, what is crowdsourcing? What is citizen science? Because when you talk to people, you get very different ideas, and it's in fact a spectrum of activities. So crowdsourcing, as defined originally by Jeff Howe in Wired magazine, is a process where individuals or organizations submit an open call for voluntary contributions from a large group of individuals, the crowd, often through an online platform. Now, that crowd can be unknown individuals, or it can be a group of trusted experts, so like the Polymath Project, where a mathematician in the UK posted a mathematical challenge he was having, and mathematicians around the world added their thoughts and collaborated in solving the problem through an online blog. Citizen science is a form of crowdsourcing, and I want to say before we get into it, we're not saying that citizen science is right for solving every scientific problem, but it can be valuable when applied to the right problem, scientific or engineering problem, and when designed properly. So citizen science. Well, there's been a lot written in the literature, and the U.S. Federal Community of Practice in Citizen Science spent a good year refining the definition of citizen science, trying to be inclusive for all the many ways in which the public can contribute to scientific research. And so the way they've defined it is contributions of the public to the advancement of science and engineering, research and monitoring, so not just basic research, but also things like environmental monitoring that may include the full spectrum of the scientific process, from identifying the research questions, designing and conducting investigations, designing, building, and testing low-cost sensors, collecting and analyzing data, developing data applications, developing technologies for science, and solving complex problems. Although that last point, we're just now seeing an emerging area of projects where we're really doing some very creative problem solving with citizen science. So again, with this graphic, you see the spectrum from sample and specimen collection, observations. With my cell phone, I can take images, or I can add a sensor to the cell phone and upload it. We have wearables now and fabrics that collect data. So there's a variety of ways in which the crowd can help us with data collection. But they also can help, as Humanitarian OpenStreetMap team talk will present on data processing, data analysis, image interpretation. And projects like Foldit allowed the crowd to actually help them solve a problem. So in that, they had a protein. They were trying to figure out how it was structured. For years, scientists and their algorithms couldn't figure it out. In a matter of weeks, the crowd, through an online video game, were able to figure out how that protein was structured related to an HIV/AIDS virus. And that could lead to new medications. What's the value proposition? Well, we can collect data with improved spatial or temporal resolution. We can increase the geographic extent or temporal scale for long-term studies. We can analyze imagery and apply big data techniques where computer algorithms might not suffice. So now with machine learning, human-in-the-loop process, the crowd can help train the machines that then accelerate our analysis, and again, generate new ideas for data applications and technologies. But citizen science comes with some challenges, and these include silos, like any other data-related activity, trust and credibility, data quality issues, but I would assert that we should follow the same data quality practices we would with any scientific endeavor. There's a lot of legal and ethical issues, depends on the country you're working in, but global Global projects have to deal with multiple different legal frameworks. Security issues of cybersecurity and safety. Sustainability, how do we motivate volunteers? How do we sustain their interest? And then, of course, the usual data, cyber infrastructure, tools, services, collaborations that we need to develop. And, for example, is working with the OGC and others on metadata for citizen science. But how do we evaluate our projects? That's a big area that's emerging. And what is the impact? And what is the value of citizen science from a socioeconomic perspective? So NASA has now funded a valuables consortium that's looking at the value of Earth observation data. This might be something we could look at. Some studies have shown it's in the millions to billions of dollars that volunteers are contributing to our research. There's an ecosystem to citizen science. Several professional associations have come together, or I should say formed in recent years, to advance the field of citizen science, the science of citizen science, develop best practice and standards. So here in the U.S., we've got the Citizen Science Association and the U.S. Federal Community of Practice on Crowdsourcing and Citizen Science, which is 350 federal staff strong from 60 different agencies. Europe's got the European Citizen Science Association, the Australian Citizen Science Association. I believe there's an Austrian Citizen Science Association, and so forth. And these organizations are beginning to collaborate and connect across the globe. There are platforms like Zooniverse, which are engaging millions of volunteers. They provide tools such as a platform that has modules that you can build projects. So they're making it very easy to get projects started. The U.S. federal government mobilized 125 federal staff to build a toolkit. So for folks who are coming new to citizen science, where do you begin? How do you design a project? What are the different approaches for handling data quality? How do you motivate volunteers? And this is building off the efforts of the Citizen Science Central toolkit. We also worked with policymakers to get a White House memo, to get legislation, to provide top-level support for U.S. federal citizen science. And most notably, we worked with the folks in USGEO and GEO to build in citizen science as part of the U.S. National Strategy and National Plan for Civil Earth Observations, and they're now doing a new assessment. So for those of you in the room from the U.S., hope you can contribute and provide input on that. So with that, I'd like to introduce our speakers. First up is Maria Kumida. Maria is a PhD candidate under the supervision of Professor Vasilou Yanis, working on interactive visualization of filtering techniques of RDF datasets with millions of elements, so big data. She's a software developer at the Institute of Communication and Computer Science, ICCS. Her research interests include other database management systems, interactive visualization techniques, and spatial data. So we ask that the lightning talk folks come and present at the podium and then sit back down when you're finished. 5 to 7 minutes, and we will hold time. And again, the hashtag is hashtag GeoSitSci. Ready?
Yep. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I'm here today to present SENT. It's a smart toolbox for engaging citizens into people-centric observation web. Thank you. Our project wants to answer the question if citizen science can play an integral part of environmental decision-making. We want to engage citizens to become the eyes of the policymakers, more or less monitor the changes in land cover and land use, and in the end, this information will be used in order to develop some flood models that will enable us to monitor and manage flood phenomena. We are going to focus in 2 different areas. Please note that on your left side is the urban area of Kifissos River, which is in Attica, Greece. There we have a river that crosses through the town of Athens. It's mostly concrete riverbanks, and there are many recent phenomena of overflowing, which have resulted in many problems, mostly damages in properties, and there have been once a very extreme phenomenon where there will be issues with people that were in extreme danger. So we want to see how we are going to be able to give the authorities the knowledge that they need to prevent such phenomena. On the right hand, we have the Danube Delta in Romania, the wetland there. Please note that there the rivers are expected to overflow. If you can see from the image, there are many water bodies among the area, and the overflow phenomena are more than often, and they are expected. The problem there is that the difference in flows have impact on the way the in the way that the land can be developed and what can we do there. So you see that we have chosen two very different areas in order to test our tool to make sure that we will be able to handle every phenomenon. Now our toolbox consists of many technologies that have as an aim to crowdsource as many information as possible from the user. We do ask the user for images, but we also ask for text, and we provide them with sensors, and we combine this information for machine learning purposes and also for models, both for land coverage and land use and flood models. In the end, we have a tool that will that we present to the policymakers in order to enable them to make decisions, educated decisions, over actions that need to take place. So there are many ways that someone can contribute in the SEND campaigns, either local volunteers and that are interested in making measures or using sensors and letting us know about the situations in the rivers. There is our gaming applications, where we ask the users to look around for our little monsters, as you see in the slide. When locating such monsters in areas that we are interested in, the user is going to take an image. We are going to extract through machine learning the information depicted there and use them to the models. So the user is motivated through the game and through the importance of the contribution to give us the images, but also he's motivated through the results, as he can see actively the decisions that through the SEND were taking and the changes that his contribution made. Last but not least, our contribution to GEOSS is going to be the harmonization platform. It's an innovating platform that will be responsible for the data quality control over the gathered data. It will store the image metadata, the data that we are going to receive from sensors, as well as the land coverage and land use maps. In addition, all the flood models and the flood risk maps in OGC compliant observations, so that we can distribute this data to anyone that might need to use them, then develop their own application based on that. That would be all. Thank you.
Thank you. So we're going to hold questions until the last of the lightning talks. So with that, I'd like to introduce Mikkel Maron. Mikkel leads the community team at Mapbox, building diverse collaborations centered on amazing mapping tools and open data to make positive change on complex global problems. As a Presidential Innovation Fellow at the State Department, Mikkel drove OpenStreetMap adoption across federal agencies. He's the co-founder of the Humanitarian OpenStreetMap team, co-founder of Map Kybera and Ground Truth Initiative, and board member of OpenStreetMap Foundation.
Hi, Leah. Hi, everybody. Leah and I were Presidential Innovation Fellows together a couple years ago. Nice to see you. I'm Mikkel Maron. I'm one of the many co-founders, grandparents of Humanitarian OpenStreetMap team. And I wanted to talk about a little bit about, well, first, how many people are familiar at all with Humanitarian OpenStreetMap team or OpenStreetMap. Okay, yeah. So, one of the primary activities of HOT, of HOT, is connecting the OpenStreetMap community, and it really is a community. It's a community of individuals who care very deeply about spatial data, who come from all sorts of backgrounds. Some of them are volunteers, but many of them are, fortunate people like me who can do OpenStreetMap and mapping as part of our job. You see here, this is a map showing kind of an overview of the HOT response to Typhoon Haiyan, which was produced by the American Red Cross. And the American Red Cross International Services Team, which is sort of like a global leader in terms of their adoption of technology and in GIS, is a critical part of HOT every day. They, but represent themselves as individuals within our community. Let me explain this picture a little bit. That red line is the path of Typhoon Haiyan, and you see these grid squares. This was kind of a summation of the work in the Tasking Manager, which is a tool that we use within HOT. We source satellite imagery from wherever we can get it. So if you happen to know anyone who has any satellite imagery, we need it, especially after emergencies. Most frequently, we go to commercial sources. Digital Globe is a very big contributor and now has an open data program after any emergency, like the recent hurricanes. They were releasing imagery, which HOT and others in the OpenStreetMap community can use to create data. So in this emergency, we're sourcing both pre-event, post-event imagery, and then dividing up this huge swath of the Philippines into small squares. The Tasking Manager is what allows thousands of people at one time to go and create data together. It's our coordination tool. We just launched version 3 yesterday, day before. Tyler Radford is the executive director of HOT, is also here. So we do a lot of work with Earth observation data, but we also just observe the Earth, and this is part of I think the strength of OpenStreetMap. It's an open platform that has lots of different uses, not just emergency response or risk prevention, like I'll talk about here, but commercial uses, hiking, anything. And so as a result, the platform has APIs, has multiple ways that you can contribute data. In the first way that we started with OpenStreetMap, this was before we had access to satellite imagery on this scale, was by walking around with GPS units. And the original plan back in 2004 was to walk basically every street in the world, convince all of our friends to do so, and eventually we'd map the whole world. But this is still, of course, you can see a lot from the sky, but as you know, you need to be on the ground. These are some of the staff. They were graduate students at RD University and University of Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, working with the World Bank, local government authorities to collect very detailed information on flood risk across the entire city, and using techniques like survey, techniques like UAV imagery, which was then posted into Open Aerial Map, which is part of HOT's contribution to GEOSS, as citizen-collected data using UAVs, and in other imagery. They actually mapped all of Dar es Salaam, which is the fastest-growing city in Africa, I believe. So this combination of many different techniques through an open API, iteratively, it's a wiki, essentially, like Wikipedia. So you can have multiple passes. The information gets better over time the more people contribute and touch it. And it's not just emergencies. So over the last year or so, HOT has been part of a partnership to map over 500,000 square kilometers around the world of buildings, just building footprints. And this is an essential data set in malaria incidence analysis, in planning for campaigns on the ground, into any kind of interventions. 500,000 square kilometers were mapped. This is just the town of the city of Livingstone, Zambia. Something like 5 million buildings were mapped over the last 6-9 months. by both volunteers and by people who were working at Digital Globe, Quintet Health Access Initiative. So it's not just something which can be activated in emergencies, but in long-term events or long-term projects like global public health scourges like malaria. We have a great guide on the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data. It's a guide to how each of the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, can take advantage of the work that happens within HOT, within OpenStreetMap. The applications are extremely wide. There is a huge community of people who work in OSM. I just was at the State of the Map US conference along with Tyler and 500 of our best friends talking about OpenStreetMap. And you had some of the largest companies in the world there, small companies, some of the largest nonprofits in the world, small nonprofits, cities, and individuals who just make use or create spatial data, and the techniques that are being explored within this community, machine learning, and combined with the global community, it's a really interesting place to be. So I think my time is up. Thank you.
Thank you, Mikkel. With that, I'd like to introduce Leticia Navarro. Leticia is the Executive Secretary of Geobonds since October 2016. She has a master's in ecological biodiversity and evolution from the University of Pierre at Marie Curie in Paris, a master of ethnobiology from the Muséum National d'Histoire Naturelle in Paris. I'm sorry, I don't have French. And a PhD in conservation biology from the University of Lisbon, Portugal. Sounds like fabulous places to study.
That is. Thank you. Sorry, I could have translated the name of my university. So thank you, and I wanted to thank the organizers for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to present Geobonds' perspective on citizen science. But before doing this, I wanted to briefly present you what Geobond is. So for those of you that are not familiar with us, we are the Group on Earth Observation Biodiversity Observation Network. We are one of the 4 GEO flagship. And our mission is to improve the acquisition, the coordination, and the delivery of biodiversity observations and related ecosystem services to a wide range of users, from the scientific community to decision makers. Ultimately, our vision is to build a globally coordinated biodiversity observation network that can contribute to effective management policies for biodiversity and ecosystem services. Our secretariat is based in Leipzig, Germany, but we are, most of all, a global partnership with a lot of partners, and actually too many partners to fit on this slide, so apologies if your logo is missing. We recently adopted an implementation plan for 2017-2020, and we built all our activities around 2 key components. On the one hand, we want to develop a standard and flexible framework for biodiversity observations. And on the other hand, we want to support the development of biodiversity observation networks per se. And both of those components aim at producing policy-relevant outputs. So to develop this framework for biodiversity observations, we are developing the essential biodiversity variables, or EBVs. They're largely inspired by the essential climatic variables, for those of you that are more familiar with them. And we can define them as a minimum set of measurements that are complementary to one another, and that can capture major dimensions of biodiversity change. So you can understand them as the level of integration between raw biodiversity observations and high-level indicators that are needed by national governments, for instance, to report to the Convention on Biological Diversity on progress towards the different Aichi targets. These DBVs are organized around 6 classes: genetic composition, species population, species traits, community composition, ecosystem structure, and ecosystem function. The biodiversity observations that are used to produce those EBVs, they come from many different sources, from remote sensing to in situ monitoring and environmental DNA. And clearly, there's an opportunity for citizen science to contribute here, either, for instance, in the acquisition of in situ biodiversity observations, if we consider the work developed by eBird, or to contribute to the mobilization of data, for instance, by cataloging museum collections or by doing photo identification. So for this presentation, I wanted to give you an example of citizen science initiatives that can or could contribute to the development of EBVs. And probably the EBV class that can be supported by the widest range of citizen science project would be the species population EBV class. So these are comprised, for instance, of species distribution EBVs, population abundance, and so on. And so these are an idea of the project that can contribute, and you can see that some have a global scope, such as iNaturalist, iSpot, eBird again, and some are national initiatives, such as Biodiversity for All in Portugal. And several of those projects that contribute to the species population EBVs can also be used to generate data to produce the EBVs in the community composition class, so for instance on species interactions and species richness. There are also some projects that produce important data to develop species trait EBVs, for instance, phenology, body size. And this is quite relevant because there are already some databases on traits that are out there for several taxa, for instance, for plants, for mammals, for birds, and more recently for amphibians. But this doesn't mean that we have time series on those traits. So having citizen scientists involved in the acquisition of data would be very relevant. I wanted to say a few words about data standards because we've been working for quite some time with GBIF to promote the use of the Darwin Core and more recently the Event Core extensions. And that allows you to inform some fields such as organism quantity, but also to relate sampling events within the same studies. And this is very useful because it can allow us eventually to produce time series of population sizes, for instance. And this is crucial for the development of the species population EBVs. Now, as I told you, our other core focus is to support the development of biodiversity observation network, or BONDS. Their mission is to contribute to the collection and the analysis of harmonized biodiversity observations, to develop interoperable biodiversity monitoring program, but also to work on those data standards. They can be organized at different scales. So we have 3 national bonds in Colombia, France, and China. We also have 2 regional bonds, one in the Arctic and one in the Asia-Pacific region. And we also have 2 thematic bonds, the marine bond, M bond, and the freshwater bond. So this doesn't mean that these are the only biodiversity observation network out there. Those are the ones that went through the endorsement process that Geobonds developed. And clearly, citizen observatories could and should become important actors within those biodiversity observation networks. We're also developing with the Alexander von Humboldt Institute in Colombia, Bond in a Box, which is an online platform for capacity building and knowledge exchange. So this platform could be used to share protocols and standards from citizen science initiative and enhance capacity building. Yeah. Well, actually, this is my last slide. So I wanted to say that the content of this talk was very largely inspired by a chapter that was written by Mark Chandlers and colleague, and that was published in the GON book for Biodiversity Observation Network. And this book is in open access, so I invite you to download it. And if you want to know more, we also publish some guidelines for monitoring. So guidelines on the monitoring of butterfly, but also on invasive species. And all this material is available on our website. And you can find the address here. And with that, I would like to thank you.
Oh, okay. Yeah. All right. So with that, we'd like to welcome Juan back up to the stage. He's a researcher at CREF and GIS developer. He's the co-creator of the Maron compressed map and the Maron map reader idea. He serves on the OGC technical committee. Lots of things you're doing here with the IEEE, ISO, GEOSS, Horizon 2020, Connect Geo, Horizon Water in EU, Ground Truth 2.0, Next GEOSS, ERA Planet. He's a member of the GEO Program Board, GEO Standards and Interoperability Forum, the GDO 6 In Situ Coordination Geotasks, and GeoSpain Users Forum chairs. So you've got a lot going on.
Yeah, in summary, the troublemaker. Okay, I'm here. I'm here to present another of the citizens observatories. We have this citizen observatory in the title of the group, and this reflects this European approach to this. But we are talking about citizen science in general. As he said, that I work in CREAF. Let's start by the definition. What makes a citizen observatory something different from, or at least particular, in the citizen science world? It's a community-based environmental monitoring and information system. They build on innovative and novel Earth observation applications embedded in portable and mobile personal devices. And this means that citizens can help and be engaged in observing our environment. There were 5 pioneer observing systems, but I would like to concentrate on the current ones. They are 4. We already had one presented. We will have another one presented in the next block. So I have here the responsibility of summarize their project in front of the actual coordinators. I believe I will skip that. Let me talk about GROW. This is about sustainable custodianship and land soil. They want to meet demands of food production, so they are doing things mainly on calibrate and validate satellite-based soil moisture. So actually the whole thing is about soil moisture with campaigns-based approach and engage. We already saw that scent is more in the image and the tagging of those images, using gaming, using machine learning, and they have a couple of cases, at least at the beginning. Maybe there are more now. I don't know. LandSense builds on an environmental platform. It has emphasis on services. They use PhotoQuest platform. They want to do change detection in land use, land cover, alerting about bird habitat risks. They work on a single sign-on. They have 3 demo cases on the landscape change, agriculture, and habitat monitoring, and many more things that will be presented later. You are too serious, maybe. I'm saying something wrong. I'm worried about, and now I'm more comfortable with ground truth because this is mine. This is the project that I'm participating in. Actually, I'm not coordinating this whatsoever. It's Zuta Wen from the UN IHE in Delft. And I will talk about it later. Let me just say that these 4 projects are on another umbrella. This is a coordinate action that wants to do an inventory of citizen observatories and sustainability, accelerate the outtake of citizen observatories, and facilitate the adoption of Earth observation communities. And I'm saying this here because since this is a coordinated action, this shares part of the objectives of this group. And we can take advantage of this. And again, the coordinator of this project to be is watching at me, so I will be careful on what I say. One thing that made me think about the presentation of what citizen science is that in ground truth, the coordinator is making a lot of emphasis on the policy and decision making there. You see here this other bubble. So we have the citizens, we have the data flow here, but also we want the citizens to influence the policy. And this is another component that we can add to citizen science is if the data they collect is because precisely it wants to influence informed decisions. No? This is again another component. So this is not about just collecting data. It's about technology sharing. It's about cooperative planning. It's about environmental stewardship, as the slide says. In any case, we are using a very sophisticated co-design process based on social science methodologies. I'm an IT guy, so I'm kind of surprised of the approach, and I'm actually learning about that. I will not give you details, but it's kind of meetings with a lot of small piece of papers and colors here and there, but also extracting information from these techniques to stimulate the discussions. And we are doing this 6 times, because we are doing this in Belgium, and this observatory is about air quality. We are doing this in the Netherlands. It's about water, as you know, Netherlands are very worried about that. Sweden, it's about water quality. In this case, in Spain, we are doing a phenological observatory influencing on climate change activities. We have biodiversity conservation in Kenya, and we have sustainable natural resources management in Zambia. And with all this heterogeneity, we should contribute to GEOSS. So actually, we need some kind of a common methodology, and we want to advocate about these standards that were previously mentioned twice, actually, by 2 previous presenters. So in this case, we want to use this sensor web enablement for citizen science white paper that comes from one of the previous citizens observatories, that the name is down there next to the tree. So we want to do the usual thing, but applying standards, we're saving costs, we're reusing things, we are doing something meaningful. So actually, I couldn't resist that. A bit of UML and XML here. This is to wake you up. I'm just showing that we are describing observations in a formal manner. And the user will never see that, but actually we are integrating things in viewers like this one. So thank you for listening to me. And since since I'm the also responsible for all the communication work package, I have to do this. So we are everywhere in the everywhere in the virtual wall, in the real wall, everywhere. Thank you.
All right, with that, I'd like to welcome our last lightning talk, Dr. Andreas Mathias. Andreas is the founder and managing director of the Secure Dimensions GmbH, situated in Munich, Germany. The company's main business since beginning in 2009 is to provide consultancy and software for enabling mainstream IT security solutions for the geospatial marketplace based on open standards. Andreas holds a PhD from the, here I go again, Technische Universität München?
Technische Universität München. Ja.
Okay, thank you. In computer science on the topic of distributed access control for geospatial information. So with that.
Guess what? Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. So the lightning talk this time is not including XML. It's not including standard descriptions. I'm trying to give you a very light overview of what LandSense is trying to do in order to build an engagement platform. So, I mean, when you start a project like this, you always have the same problem to face: how to avoid to build a system that is in silo. You need to deal with privacy of users because they contribute and their personal information must be protected. Also, you have the challenge that the objects that they observe, they must be protected. So if you have endangered species or these kinds of things, then not everything is open. So and then you wonder what you do and how to start off. And in LandSense, we have very many partners, and they have systems out there. They have services. They have apps out there. So what to do? Certainly not to build a centralized system, not to come up with a centralized database for the users, because that would be another silo. So we were thinking hard now what to do and how to avoid that typical pitfall. So, and the idea is to build a LandSense engagement platform. And what I was wondering, and that's my provocative part, As Juan said, some are a troublemaker. So the provocative part is, would that be a solution to Geo or someone else? Yeah. So here for GEOSS. So very quick, the engagement platform in Lansense is about, well, you can participate as a citizen scientist. That's very trivial. You can engage as an application developer. So if you have a great idea and you have an application that you're hosting and you wonder, maybe that could be used in citizen science to improve things, then what I want to have that being used. So how do you deal with that? Then in Lansense, we have apps and we have services and we have APIs and we have data sets. So we have the toolbox to do all that, but we do not have a centralized system. We have a distributed system. Yeah? So we're providing the services, APIs, and other tools to whoever needs them. Yeah? So in order to do that, you need to build something, a framework. Yeah? You don't build a system, you build a framework where the APIs are clearly defined, how to participate as a user, as an app developer, as a service provider. Yeah? So a little of that is on this slide. So basically what we're doing is we do the same thing as Google does and all the others in the social media environment arena. But we do not do one thing. We do not force you to create a user account with us and log in with us each and every time. Instead, what we do, we say, OK, and here's a little techie stuff in there, SAML 2 compliant authentication. If you don't know what that is and you wonder, ask me afterwards, please. But the most important thing is that SAML 2 compliant authentication is done by all universities on this planet. The universities, the academic research institutes, they're all organized in academic federations. And they use a SAML 2 compliant authentication method. So what we do in Lansense, we do exactly the same thing. We say, OK, we use standards, security standards, to build a system. So we're using OAuth 2. We deal with access tokens, but we don't force you to log in with us. You can choose your organization. And at the moment, so the second bullet there is, what we are doing is allowing everyone from any academic federation in the world to use our system. You can log in with your home institute and get to our applications, services, data sets, whatsoever you can contribute. And at the moment, we are in a test phase with the German Academic Federation. And once that test phase is done, hopefully next year in February, we have EduGain enabled. So that means use your university account or whatsoever to participate, to log into our system. So on the server side of things, SAML is not really the thing to go. These days, where you have APIs and web applications and mobile applications, you need to do something else. So we do access control and access tokens using OAuth 2. So with that, you need something that brokers between the SAML Academic Federation authentication and access tokens that you can use in your web apps, in your mobile apps, to access the services, right? So we operate a core component, which is the authorization server. So, and it's brokering between the identities coming in from federations to an access token that you can use on the services that are in Lansense. So, and here's my provocative slide, which is the last. The question that I was wondering is our contribution to GEOSS. What could it be? Well, perhaps this metaphor, this framework concept, where you build a distributed system, and with that, you can manage who is on and who can log in with the coordination center. It's very similar, or it's actually identical to what the academic federations do. Then you can log in via those academic federations, via Google, Facebook, whatsoever. So that could also be done by Geo. And then they can operate this core central service, which is the authorization server. So if you have a neat app that you want to register so that it can be used on Geo resources, well, then go to the authorization server, register your app, and then people can use it. And as a service provider, well, you don't have to register. You just accept those access tokens that come via a standard called OAuth 2. And that's it. So with that, you can ensure that you know who the user is. You can make sure that you have only that piece of information of a user that you really need to do the service. So you can deal with the new Data Protection Act coming out in Europe, in force next year, May 25. That's very important. So with all this concept, I leave it at that. And I'd like to thank you. And if you have questions, then please, later. I'm here only today. Tomorrow, I'm flying back home. Thank you.
So if we could get the presenters to maybe sit here for the questions or stand, and then we'll have to have one of them right here. There you go.
It's very bright here.
Oh, yes.
Any questions?
No.
No? In the back.
My name is Debra. Thanks. My name is Debra Long, and I'm here representing the GROW Observatory. I'm sorry we're the only one that didn't give a presentation, but you can ask me questions afterwards, or we have a poster. My question was in response to one of the challenges that Leah threw up at the beginning about sustainability. One thing we're aiming to do is to engage 20,000 citizens over the next 2 years. How do we maintain that momentum and their enthusiasm going forward, given that citizen science isn't actually free, but it still represents great value for money? I wonder whether Mikkel might answer that. You seem to have found a solution.
Actually, we'd like to hear from all the panelists.
Yeah, me too. So the interesting thing about OpenStreetMap is it's not dependent on a single organization for continuity. It's a platform in which different organizations of very different types can come and go, and yet the movement itself continues. Starting something like that is hard, but it's something to keep in mind is that it's very hard for like one institution or even a few institutions to keep something going. One ideal way is to create an ecosystem where there's a number of partners and that's why there's so many platforms in citizen science and crowdsourcing, finding places to collaborate where there's already technical infrastructure, but also can be expanded is I think one. That's why OpenStreetMap is partially successful. You can just start using what's there.
One of the others of you like to respond?
Yes. For me, in order to keep the user happy, you have to show him how you use the information. I believe that's in StreetMaps too. If the user sees that the information that he provides is used, and there is some reaction to his actions, if that's correct term, I believe that then he's going to come back and give you again the information that you ask. As long as there is some reaction and some development and some growth within the application. And I believe that StreetMaps do that, and they do it in a very an exceptional way, if I may.
Sorry. No problem. In Ground Truth, we are using this co-design approach in the way that users take ownership of the observatories. So this is done in the start, and they know we are there to help. We are doing the hard thing to start the observatory, but they participate in all phases, and it will be their observatory. It is not the solution. I know I'm not answering your question completely, but it's part of it.
From my perspective, as I mentioned earlier, I think that having the citizen observatories become important parts of a biodiversity observation network and acknowledging that those citizen scientists are actors of those biodiversity observation network would be a step forward.
Do I have to say something? Okay.
Yes, you must.
All right, we have a question from the Twitterverse. Philip Southam asks, are these really collecting large amounts of data using private computer information or public cloud service?
To whom is that question?
To anyone who wants to answer.
Oh.
Okay.
So I guess, is there privacy questions or things available and
This
open
is
to
the privacy guy.
For privacy, that would be my thing. But I don't know what to say.
How is privacy handled in your program?
Okay, how much time do I have? Okay, no, I mean, it's not really funny. We have this new data regulation, this Data Protection Act coming out in force next year in Germany. In Europe. I'm a little jet lagged. So the problem really is that you need to obey with that regulation, and privacy is one of the big aspects. So which pieces of user information can you actually use and process for a particular purpose? So I guess the challenge is with citizen science that you need to clearly state what the objective is. Why do you need personal information? For what particular purpose do you need that, and store it and process it? And if you can make that clear in your project, in your system, then you are in good shape to be correct with the privacy aspect.
Still thinking.
In ground truth, I believe there is no observatory that is using the cloud. We are, to give you an example, the phenological observation is using a service that is in the GBV Spain premises. It's a simple answer in this case.
A follow-up question is, are they using cloud services to provide the cyber infrastructure for these programs?
Well, okay, so we are building not a centralized system, so I don't know. Landsense is using a distributed system, so where the different participating organizations host their things. So I would need to ask them how they host it and what they do, but I believe many of the solutions are in the cloud, potentially, yeah, and that is not a problem, that's not a challenge. So long your personal information, your private data is not there, it's not stored in the cloud, because that would be a problem. So, but storing data and services and providing that from the cloud, I think that's general, that's what everyone does.
Yeah, so OpenStreetMap is also very much a hybrid, it's a federated model. At the core, core servers are actually maintained directly by the foundation, who take privacy very seriously. We collect very minimal personal information. It's mostly about collecting data out in the world. And we spend a lot of time with making clear the implications of collecting spatial data. That being said, data that's produced in OpenStreetMap is distributed in a wide network, and so it ends up on many cloud services. Mapbox, like the company I work for, is all run on AWS, and we have a pipeline for bringing OpenStreetMap data in, and other companies and entities. HOT holds a number of services. I'm not actually don't know the details of the technical infrastructure of HOT. I think it's probably also a mix of AWS and hosted servers.
Other questions from the audience? Tanya?
A follow-up question to security and privacy. So, taking it a little bit one step further, if balancing security and privacy of data with a need for data provenance, for example, is to estimate biases of the downstream models, and for whether it's biodiversity or HOT or others. So, how not only the privacy and security aspects of this, but tracking data and metadata in a way which allows then model building for downstream.
Okay. Okay, so one aspect that I haven't mentioned, what Landsense is also dealing with, is licensing information, provenance, and all of that. Because when you have a data set that you process, then what can you do with the result? So what limitations do you have? Which license agreements do you need to be compliant with? So the question really is, if you have a data set to start off with and you have a product at the end, which licenses can you put on that? But the other way around is, you have a data set with a particular license on it, now you want to run a citizen campaign, what data license must the citizen scientist acknowledge when he creates information? Because at the end, you want that information come together with another set of data, which has a pre-given license on it, and at the end you want all of that package, that product, you want to sell that with another license on top. So the question really is, which license agreement does a user, a citizen science, must acknowledge before starting observing? And in Landsat, that is a very important aspect. We simply do not let people collect stuff. We also let them know what the licensing conditions are going to be, so what is going to happen with the stuff that you collect, so to make sure they understand what this can all be used for, so that you can actually build products, downstream things, by combining the observations from citizens with, let's say, geospatial data. Yeah?
I was just thinking, do I want to answer the licensing question or the privacy question, like which is sort of the lesser of two evils? And I'll do the, yeah, it's one of the most complicated questions in just data generally. And if there's anything, if I had a wish for maybe something within Geo, would really be examining with an eye towards simplification. There are just so many different ways that data is licensed and shared towards maximum flexibility and maximum shareability. There's been a lot of good work in the open data space, but it's still like, yeah, it's really messy and complicated, and there's very few legal experts who actually can wrap their minds around all of the implications. On privacy within OpenStreetMap, you have a user which is identifiable with edits. So you can build up reputation within the system, and that is really critical in order for doing quality analysis and for building the community. However, you are under no obligation to link that to your real-world identity. So in that way, you can use the record of someone's participation as a way of assessing to the degree to which you may need to, whether they're trusted in the system or not. But that doesn't mean that you know who they are in real life. Though many people do reveal who they are in real life and come together and meet at events like this one or at State of the Map US, which Tyler and I were just at.
Any additional questions in the audience? Okay, I have a question. I guess it'll be the last one. Cybersecurity isn't often talked about in citizen science projects, and we're often dealing with open systems, right? Open source, open code, open participation. Particularly HOT and maybe some of the others are working in zones where you may be in conflict zones or have vulnerable populations. How do you deal with the security risks of these open systems?
Yeah. Good. You were good, Leah. So what I can say is email is an open system. Remember, which still has a lot of vulnerabilities, but you might remember just a few years ago, like the amount of spam you were getting in your inbox. This has been solved in a lot of a combination of interesting ways in terms of like pattern analysis, identifying on the back end sources of bad actors in the email space. It's a tough problem, but I think we have some examples which are solvable. We have examples to draw on which have solved the security questions around open systems.
No, it's a difficult question, and address it correctly. It requires responsibility. The only thing that comes to my mind related with the question is the Kenya case, where we are going to record the big animals there, the big five and so on. This opens another issue. No, you publish data about those things because the tourists love to know where they are, and then they are no longer there because the hunters hunt them. So this is another ramification of this, and there are different methods. The most obvious one to move a little bit the position. The less obvious one is consider that some components or your information, not all the record, but just the subspecies is not published just because this has problems, particularly, for instance, in agriculture, where you have different species and different farmers competing together. So these details have another level of privacy in general.
Okay, so one thing on that, use crowdsourcing. HackerOne, bug bounty program. Yeah? So create bug bounty programs and ask the crowd, the security hackers, to find the bug in your system. So hacker.one is one of the examples. They broker between you, the program constructor, and everyone who is capable of finding a bug. So they broker in between, and there have been very interesting security hacks being awarded. And the top score was by Google. So Google, the bounty from Google was the top score ever on a vulnerability in their system. So that's my pledge, right? Use standards all over, but the more we build systems that are interconnected, the more likelihood is that they are that there is a vulnerability, and you yourself cannot find it, just by yourself. So use crowdsourcing. Use citizen science, not really, but use crowdsourcing and create a bug bounty program, and then let's see how it goes. Hacker.one.
Well, we got one last question from the online, from Twitter. Roberto Roca from Livestream says, was the idea behind LandSense based on the service-oriented architecture?
What's the idea behind it?
Yeah, or was the idea behind LandSense based on service-oriented architecture?
Was the idea
So
behind
why
LandSense?
you choose service-oriented architecture, probably?
Yes.
Easy.
Yes.
With that, we'd like to have you thank our panelists. So, introduce Crystal again.
Great, thank you. I'd like to invite our panelists to please join me in the front, and you can all take a seat up here at the panel table. While they are getting situated, just a few housekeeping notes. As all of you can see, we like to be relatively informal here at these site events at GEO. And so again, our idea is to have an interactive discussion and presentation. Continue to tweet your questions or through the live stream as well as in the room. We will be moving on to our panel presentations to be followed by our discussions after that. All right. All right, we have one more missing panelist. Oh, there he is. Okay, great. All right, so we had a couple of goals for this site event. One is to inform the GEO community about the depth and the breadth of work that can be done in partnership and using citizen science as a tool. For our public audience and our DC audience, and hopefully some of our live stream audience, the idea was to introduce GEO, what it's doing in the citizen science world, and what some of the potentials there are. And so that's kind of why we're touching on a variety of different projects, a variety of different experts, and trying to hit up quite a number of perspectives as we do this. Our panel now will be looking both at the projects that they themselves have participated in, worked on, and directed, but also hopefully giving us some thoughts on the way forward and the next steps. What are the best practices that we need to be looking at? What are the tools? What are the standards? How do we increase the use of citizen science? How do we bring it to the GEO community in a lasting and widespread way? So what are some of the issues that we need to be thinking about? So I will turn to our first panelist. Dr. Ann Browser is the Director of Innovation at the Woodrow Wilson Center for Scholars in Washington, D.C. She explores how processes such as science and technology development can be meaningfully opened up to support greater public participation, especially through citizen science and crowdsourcing. Today, she will be presenting on her work with organizations like the Open Geospatial Consortium and the US-based Citizen Science Association to understand the wide range of standards that are relevant to citizen science data and to promote interoperability between projects on local, regional, national, and global scales.
Thank you for that introduction. And thank you, everybody, for coming to this session. I'm very excited to see so many people in the room. So, as Crystal mentioned, I'm currently at the Wilson Center, but a lot of the work that I'll be talking about today started when I was in graduate school. And I think my involvement in citizen science probably started in 2010. I was a master's student at the time, and I was working on a project seeking to understand social network analysis software and how it could be used in different ways. And somebody gave me a set of biodiversity data that was being shared between different projects and repositories, and I made this diagram, and through the process, I became aware of the vast quantities of citizen science data that were being shared in these national and global scale data sets. And this was sort of my introduction to citizen science, and it shaped my understanding of citizen science as something that can provide structure and scale. It structures the efforts of individuals who are collecting data to answer a particular research question on a local level, and it allows this information to scale to have impact not just on the initial question of interest, but also potentially in national and global scale research. And I'm going to talk about structure and scale today, first through a case study of a project that I'm leading called the Global Mosquito Alert Consortium, and then also through more general efforts to standardize citizen science. So Global Mosquito Alert is a consortium of mosquito monitoring projects that, through standards, allow local projects to share data on national and global scales. The consortium has what I thought was an ambitious goal of collecting 2 million records on 6 continents by 2022. So this is within 5 years of the consortium's funding. This work really started in 2014 when different citizen science projects around the world started engaging volunteers in mosquito monitoring. In 2015, there was a conference of the European Citizen Science Association in Barcelona, where many of these projects met for the first time. And then in 2016, the European Citizen Science Association chartered a policy working group with the Mosquito Task Force. And in 2017, everybody met again in Geneva at the UN Environment Program office there, and formalized Global Mosquito Alert as an open, common set of protocols, platform, and toolkit that is augmented with modular components created to meet both global and research and local research and management needs. And most recently, the Wilson Center and partners have started working with NASA Develop to do proof of concept data integrations between different consortium member data, and then also with data from remote sensing. So this sounds like a very straightforward idea, but it's a bit more difficult in practice. So right now we're working primarily with 6 established projects and also a range of pilot initiatives. And different projects have different local data collection needs, but in general we're finding that there are 4 common protocols. Real-time vector monitoring. Do you see a mosquito? How many? Habitat mapping and breeding grounds. Some of the projects that we work with engage children, 13 or under for GLOBE, also high schoolers in documenting mosquitoes. And they don't necessarily want these children to go out and study vectors, so they're collecting information on habitat and breeding grounds as proxy data. Bites and nuisance. Does nuisance happen? And if so, how severe is it? And then also some of the most innovative projects that we're working with are doing DNA analysis, either on specimens that were sent in directly or through environmental DNA. And these projects need to coordinate among different projects working with a single protocol, also between different projects using different protocols, and then with all sorts of different types of data. For example, most notably, public health data on the spread of the actual diseases that these vectors are carrying. So this does sound a bit easy, but there are numerous differences between the projects, and I'll just talk quickly about 3 of the projects that we're working with. Probably one of the oldest and best established projects is called Mosquito Alert, and this is housed in Spain, in Catalonia. They collect information on 2 vectors, primarily carrying Zika and yellow fever. They have a mobile application and also a visualization platform for species presence, primarily via photo, but then they're also collecting information on breeding site, which is in response to the needs of their volunteers. They've collected 9,301 reports as of a few months ago when I did the initial slides. But of these, only 3,473 are validated, either because there was a photo voucher available or because the photo voucher was both available and sufficiently clear that scientists could say, yes, this is in fact one of the species that we're interested in. A second partner, Mugen Radar, a project that's currently based in the Netherlands, they collect information on any and all species for forecasting. I think this project is really neat because when they talk about forecasting, they're actually working with some local weather stations so that there were times last summer when you got your weather report and you also got a report on whether or not there would be mosquitoes in your area. The Netherlands is sufficiently north that mosquitoes aren't necessarily that common, and species distribution is an important research question. So they're having citizen scientists send them in actual specimens of mosquitoes whenever possible, and when not, they'll accept a picture. They've engaged 5,236 people so far. Sending in a specimen is hard. They've collected 3,593 research-grade samples. The final project, ZanzaMap in Italy. They're currently dealing with an outbreak right now, so they're quite busy. Something I wanted to point out here, this graph shows that they've had different spikes in participation over time when this project received coverage from different local news partners. And this isn't necessarily unique in citizen science. It's something that all of the projects that we're working with have reported. But it creates a challenge for integrating data when you have literally exponentially more records, but that really reflects observation effort and not actual species themselves. Collecting information primarily on one species, they involve the general public, and then they're also collecting information on insecticide sprayings because they have private sector partners in the form of different control companies, and they work with these companies to help understand whether or not their products are being useful. So through the NASA Develop project, we integrated data from these 3 organizations, also with data from MODIS and SRTM. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Early findings, not all data are good. So in all 3 projects, you found about 50% of the data that was submitted was actually used. This is still vastly, vastly beyond what any scientist working in isolation would be able to achieve. Not all data are open. All of these projects share a subset of their data easily and accessibly, and all of them would actually be willing to share more, but people simply don't know to ask. And then not all of these data are obvious. So this is a documentation question in regards to what it is exactly that you're looking at. And in some cases, this is very fundamental. For example, the Develop team didn't understand what nuisance meant. So they were deleting all of the data on nuisance and just keeping the data on species occurrence that was framed as such. But the bigger picture questions, first of all, it can be integrated. What the Develop team actually did was they reduced a lot of the data to simple species, date, time, and location. And also through this process, is it challenging to integrate citizen science data? Yes. But the Develop people who had worked on multiple projects were also really adamant that there really aren't any challenges here that they don't see while working with scientists conducting research by other means. And this shows some temporal changes in distribution. And they're also looking in the next Develop semester, about the relationship between species presence and distribution to elevation and weather. I always ask myself, so what do you learn from this about standards and citizen science as a whole? And also looking beyond the mosquito monitoring projects to the other people that I work with at the Wilson Center. And the main takeaway is that standards is a complicated word. When we talk about standards, we're often talking about tools for data collection. In the case of Global Mosquito Alert, there is a canonical app for each of the 4 data collection protocols, and this will be modified for various local contexts. And through this process, we secure interoperable data while also reusing investments in infrastructure. EPA also has been promoting sensors for air and water quality monitoring, and in regulatory environments especially, it's important to understand how these tools align with regulatory standards or regulatory frameworks or not. Standards are also protocols for data collection. We learned from the develop that these should be common and flexible and maybe a little bit generic if large-scale integration really is your goal. There are standards in terms of methods and processes for work and for collaboration. People think about standardizing processes for engaging their volunteers, such as informed consent forms, privacy policies, also standard methods for data validation. And these should not only be developed, but they should be critically well documented. And they should be presented as repeatable workflows to maximize interoperability. And then all of this sort of combines as standards as transdisciplinary data and metadata formats, including information about citizen science projects and information about citizen science observations. And this brings me to a standard that is currently under development by the Citizen Science Association, who's coordinating it. I shouldn't say they're developing it per se. It's called Public Participation in Scientific Research, or PPSR Core. And we're envisioning this as a common data model with three main schemas. And we understand that this isn't sort of the first time someone has tried to standardize citizen science, and we're working with a number of organizations, which I'll get into a bit later, to make sure that we're duplicating and in many cases contributing to, building upon and contributing to rather than duplicating previous work. So when I talk about a common data model with three main schemas, this is sort of our draft lay of the landscape. So the project data model is a coordinated cluster of citizen science activities and data. That's the definition of a project. And information in this data model describes the context and the purpose for data collection activities. For example, is a project sponsored by a research organization? Is it run out of a federal agency? Is it run in an educational context? Projects may have data sets. Data sets are descriptive and contextual information about a collection of data records that were collected using a common method and a common data schema. And all data sets will have data. And these are the observations or the analysis points that actually constitute the citizen science work itself. What have we done so far? This kind of started in 2010 and 2011 with Data One, which had a public participation in scientific research working group at the time. And they were interested in understanding and documenting the field or the paradigm of citizen science. I would say that this was primarily an intellectual endeavor. And then in 2013 and 2014, 4 different databases of citizen science projects emerged in the United States, and these databases needed to share records. So they really started working on what I call the project schema to be able to do so. In 2015, we saw a tremendous amount of support from the US federal government, which also advanced plans to build a 5th database of federal citizen science and crowdsourcing projects. And this really helped this project gain force, both in terms of making some real progress on the project data model, but also critically starting to work with external partners like the European Citizen Science Association, the Australian Citizen Science Association, and the Open Geospatial Consortium. And through these partnerships, we sort of reconceptualized what we were trying to do, from just sharing information about citizen science projects and sharing projects between databases to the larger goal of creating and documenting parallel processes for knowledge generation and use through citizen science and crowdsourcing. And we're now working with additional organizations, including TADWIG, who are the stewards of the Darwin Core Data Standard, a WDS, CoData Joint Task Group on Citizen Science, and the European Commission Joint Research Center, as well as now GEO and GEOSS. What do we have to do? Pretty much everything. So one of the things that we're realizing is that it's a lot of people who know citizen science and a lot of people who know standards getting together in various rooms and having conversations about citizen science and the role of standards. And what we're not doing is engaging people who are working in different disciplinary communities or between disciplines on the ground to implement projects and to collect information. So we would like to hold a series of roundtables, especially extending beyond biodiversity and environmental monitoring, which have historically driven a lot of these work, to understand what standards mean to communities in astronomy, in agriculture, in energy, and in humanities, and in health, who are really interested in using citizen science. After that, we'd sort of like to iterate on the common data model that I presented earlier, and come up with a high-level skeleton, which will really allow us to flesh out the 3 data models in greater depth. A lot of the work on the project data model is already ongoing. I'm pretty comfortable with where this is. The dataset data model gets a little tricky. This will involve a lot of crosswalks between existing data standards and also coming up with new controlled vocabularies. data quality is something that keeps coming up again and again. And through a lot of my work, I'm learning that projects really do have rigorous validation practices in place. And in some cases, data is even being validated more than once. And the problem is actually of documentation. So if we had a standardized way to document data validation and other processes to ensure data quality, then that would be really great. Also, the concept of fitness for purpose more generally, which has a data quality component but also extends beyond. And then finally, in terms of the observational data model, we'll be doing some more crosswalks between established standards and then also some proof of concept data integrations. For example, the Global Mosquito Alert Develop project was really helpful, but didn't actually combine vector data with public health data, which I think is a really critical next step for us to do. So very interested in understanding how to work with GEO and the GEOSS communities, and happy to hear what others on the panel have to say.
Great, thank you so much, Anne. I can't even begin to tell you how many notes I took because I think you really hit on a lot of the critical issues that we're here to discuss. So I'm hoping to hear more from you when we get to the discussion section. Our next panelist is Dr. Dixon Butler, who is the president of the Youth Learning as Citizen Environmental Scientist, a grant-making nonprofit organization endeavoring to help improve science education. His extensive experience includes more than 25 years of various government roles, including as director of the NASA GLOBE program and as staff on the House Committee on Appropriations. Dr. Butler?
Thank you. Well, I'm not sure I'm going to say the right things for this session, but let me take a crack at the talk I prepared and see if I can save a little time at the end to say a few other things. Whoops. I consult for NASA on the GLOBE program, which I used to be the chief scientist of. I was briefly the head of it, but the main role I've played is as the chief scientist, and de facto, that's what I might as well be again. We work with a lot of folks. And basically, the tradition in the 22 and a half years of GLOBE has been focused on the K through 12 students and their teachers. That's broadening out to the being open to, shall we say, lifetime learners, which means all forms of citizen scientists. But we're still in the early steps of that. Now, we had a collaboration that was magical, and it started with the NASA's SMAP satellite, soil moisture active and passive. Alas, the active went completely fairly fast, but the passive has continued. The scientists involved said, look, we need ground truth. We need actual observations. And the observations have two purposes. One is ground truth. Another is, with its 35-kilometer pixel size, microwave sensing of surface soil moisture is pretty much obscured by proximity to large water bodies. So if you're within like 35 kilometers of a large water body, such as an ocean or a lake, a big lake, SMAP cannot give you a good surface soil moisture reading. The algorithms won't work. And I don't think there's much of a way physics-wise around that. So the second purpose is actually extending the soil moisture knowledge into these other areas. A piece of good luck happened, and that is that the standard, the gold standard for measuring soil moisture is simply gravimetric soil moisture measurements, where you take a sample, you weigh it wet, you dry it, and you weigh it dry, and you take off the can or whatever. And that's what the citizen scientist does. In this case, I mean, it's, so all of a sudden the citizen scientists are doing the gold standard measurement, and then there's that satellite up there. So, any rate, that worked very well. There's also the Global Precipitation Mission, and even with its predecessor, the TRIM, Tropical Rainfall Measurement Mission, the emphasis has always been that they like rain gauge data, and they were willing to work with GLOBE on that. And also automated weather station data as well. And so these things have come together very nicely, and they've actually been bolted together as we've extended the effort measurement-wise. And there was an El Nino, so it got named the El Nino campaign after it was initially a SMAP campaign, and then it became the El Nino Southern Oscillation campaign, because rather frankly, if you're going to try and answer the question of, gee, does El Nino have an effect in my local community? you're going to have to measure for several years. And so the idea of keeping people engaged as we sort of somewhat move the target. There's a picture of SMAP. And I think I've probably already said enough of that. There's the picture of SMAP, the portrait. And there's the A-train, including which is the NASA colloquialism for this mostly atmospherically connected set of different satellites. And it includes the Global Precipitation Mission, it includes the EOS AM and PM satellites, mostly the AM. So what happened? And this is something about engagement. The surface soil moisture measurements, basically 205 sites so far and 4,511 measurements. As you can see, a few people have really gone crazy and are just continuously, wonderfully contributing data. A lot of people tried it once and haven't come back. So, that's one of the realities here, is we haven't given up, but we certainly would like to, shall we say, move that curve up and have the bulge part move to the right. Now, this is let me see. Oh, this is a map that shows you the different sites in the United States where you see those little dots. Do they show up pretty well on the screen? Not really awfully well. So if you've got good eyesight, I'm sure you're doing fine. And then this is from a school, and this gives you some picture of what can happen in terms of surface soil measurements. And this is pretty impressive. This is certainly not data you could easily go get without a lot of effort as a professional scientist. Same thing for precipitation. And you'll notice the number of measurements is just unbelievable, but partly that's, in this particular case, I think it may have included sites that have reported since 2014, but it may have included all the data they ever reported. I didn't have the time to filter that out. Here's where they're located, at least in the United States. My apologies, but if I blew this up and showed the world, the spots on the screen would literally be invisible. And here's 1 year's worth of rain data from a school in Iowa. And, every storm's there. They've done amazing work. So, some conclusions, and then let me say a few extra things. You can deliver a lot of data through student citizen science and from citizen science in general. You can get a geographic distribution of participation, but it's going to be probably somewhat scattered. In the GLOBE program, there are areas that we've reached out. I mean, Croatia, if I showed you the soil moisture chart for Croatia, it's a dense network of sites. I mean, the Croatians just are amazing in terms of the GLOBE program. They're the #1 data reporting country in the world. The #2 data reporting country in the world is Saudi Arabia. And if you leave out, this is leaving out the U.S. automated weather stations. When you throw in the automated weather stations, the United States dominates. But without them, in terms of what the citizen scientists are actually going out and taking the readings, those are the 2 leading countries in the world. And they're not the ones you'd normally think of. Let's see. It gets to the point of hardcore major contributors. But there was a lot of effort here. I mean, if you're going to do this rain measurement in general, these are people who actually went out and installed a rain gauge in the appropriate place where it would collect rain and only collect rain and not have extra water sort of thrown in randomly. The surface soil moisture, that you got to basically go out there, take a sample, weigh it, dry it, weigh it again. It takes several days in the literally least expensive way of drying the soil, which is with like sort of a hobbyist lamp for keeping reptiles warm. It can take 3 days to dry out a reasonable soil sample. So the commitment from the citizen scientists is not casual. And every measurement, well, that's it. It requires considerable effort. I've heard a number of things stated today. First of all, I haven't heard much that GLOBE hasn't had to confront. GLOBE's been around for 22 and a half years. It basically works, when it started, We didn't use the term citizen science, and actually I had to sort of encourage people to begin to use it as it's matured and become much more a commonplace that people understand. But that's what it's been doing. And key elements of it were this sense of we had to have protocols, and the protocols had to be designed to deliver research quality data. What do I mean by research quality? I mean data in earth science. The critical thing there, maybe in general, is that the data are intercomparable over time and space. They may not be perfect. They may not be good enough for one research project, but good for another. But they have to have some real veracity and some staying power, or you can't use them for student research, not to mention you can't do them for professional research. Another point I would make, which I see strayed a lot in earth science, in people's thinking. In general, in doing earth science, we do not use the scientific method in the same way as is conventional. We only have one earth to study, and so that changes everything. And in particular, I even heard it this morning, not all earth science work is appropriate to have a single scientific question. In planning the Earth observing system, we did not do that. We basically looked at what are the means for observing the planet. The problem was sort of let's get as much of the global understanding and the information, the data that are needed, and lots of problems will surface that need different kinds of data sets. All you have to do is think about the advanced high-resolution radiometer and the NOAA operational satellites of old. It was done for cloud imaging and things like that. Who knew it was going to give you a vegetation index? So generally the approach, and this is true pretty much throughout the GLOBE program, it's not to answer one scientific question. It's to gain a characterization of the global environment or the local environment and have that be available for all the different science questions you can throw at it and use it to answer. And that really is different, and it's taken a long time, I think, for the earth science community to help the rest of the world that can run controlled experiments where they've got a control. We don't have a control Earth. So understanding that we do science but without a control like that has been a real battle, but I think it's been long since won. Data standards. There are lots of them. I wish I was more articulate in defending them or talking about them, but they're something we worry about in GLOBE's data system all the time. GLOBE's data system is, one could argue, maybe a silo in the sense of we do have a data system, an archive. Apropos of one of those earlier questions, the GLOBE data system is now in the cloud. I mean, all of it's in the cloud almost. I think the last little elements of it are moving into the cloud. There will be some non-cloud backup that's pretty deep backup, but basically it's out there. It's not in one cloud site, it's in at least two. And those two are, shall we say, significantly spatially separated to try and make them robust. But the standards are there. It's important that they're there. Everything is made public, except for things like students' names. We now have an app called the Globe Observer app, which runs on your mobile phone. If you would like to take mosquito larvae information and report it, please download the Globe Observer app, because this has become sort of a new feature in GLOBE. I guess when you start dealing in the life sciences, the audience expands greatly, and GLOBE will be, courtesy of the Department of State, U.S. Department of State, working to spread the measurements that were referred to earlier of mosquito larvae, primarily by students, but whatever, through formal and informal education, to at least 15 countries that have lots of Zika risk. How am I doing on time?
A minute or two left.
Okay. I'm trying to go through a checklist in my mind. I may be better off answering questions later. But let me just say one other thing, and it's sort of not apropos to most of GEO, but it's apropos to the community that's going to be necessary to sustain GEO, and that is, I think citizen science, particularly environmental citizen science, earth science, citizen science, has the potential to reform science education in the world. I think for too long, we've thought we were teaching science when all we were doing was reenacting the past in the laboratory and making people learn a bunch of facts. Facts are important. So's reenacting them in the laboratory and building up skills. But if you want to learn science, you've got to do science. We wouldn't kid ourselves to believe we taught somebody to write if they never wrote a paper or learned how to talk, never gave a speech. For too long, we've been letting people not do science. I think every science class should include the actual doing of a scientific research project. I don't care whether it's individual or a group or the whole class. But one needs to live the scientific method, not just learn about it in a book. And with that, I'll just say thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Butler. I couldn't agree more with your inspiring words at the end. And how do we encourage that the value is not just what the science community gets out of it, but also what citizen scientists themselves receive from engaging in this. And so I think that's an important thing for not just GEO to consider, but as you said, for everyone who is thinking about engaging with these kinds of projects. Our next speaker will be Max Kriglia, who is the lead scientist at the European Commission Joint Research Center. He also represents the European Commission on the GEO Program Board.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. As my name is Max, I work for the European Commission. So for those who are not so familiar with this beast, it is like the civil service in any of your countries. And our main job, or the main job of my colleagues, I should say, is normally to put forward proposals for policy, have them discussed, then the governments in Europe and the European Parliament approve them or not, and then the job of still the civil service is to make sure that they're followed up and implemented. That's the normal job of public administration. I work in a particular directorate, which is the one called Joint Research Center, so our job is to do science, but science that informs the policy. So the main policies in Europe that we inform are agriculture, environment, transport, regional policy, etc. In the past, we have mainly been involved in trying to make sure, particularly in the environmental domain, that information that is collected by governments is made more visible, accessible, so that there is greater accountability, greater transparency, and this has been the main work that we have been engaged for the last 10, 15 years. So develop what in the US is called the National Spatial Data Infrastructure. In Europe is called the Infrastructure for Spatial Information. In Europe, it's a bit larger, but more or less is the same thing. So it's really to try to make this information more available. And once we've done that, and we are still working on that, we started saying, well, yes, public sector information is very important. We also have information from sensors and program and satellites. But clearly, we also need to look beyond the norm, and we need to look at other sources of information from the public, information from sensors, Internet of Things, mobile phones, et cetera, et cetera. And that's how we started engaging in citizen science. It was really sort of trying to expand that universe. But all the time, our take is that this has to be important to improve the science, but most importantly, that has to inform the policy. And now there was a great question before was, how do you keep people engaged and motivated? Well, you need to give them something in return. People don't do things for nothing for very long, okay? So they need to see that there is some action that follows from their participating in a program. Now, if you want to do that in policy terms, we have a very interesting challenge at the moment because a lot of policymakers get very excited about citizen science, and they want us to do more citizen science. Until you point out that, of course, if you want to keep then the citizens engaged, you have to give them some power. So are you willing to give some of your power up? So there you have a wee problem, because then otherwise it's just tokenism. It's just pretending that they're involved rather than really giving sequence to their action. So this is basically the message that I wanted to give, is this about reconfiguring power if you want to be serious about citizen science in policy or contributing to policy. If we're talking about contributing to write an academic paper, that's another matter. What you see here is a photograph of a real exercise where we involved the public in the Danube area to collect data, and particularly related to species and alien species. We ran over the last couple of years a program where we funded a whole range of mobile apps on environmental issues largely involving the public and involving open data. So the challenge there was, if you have a good idea on how to use open data and how to use the public, come up, make a proposal, we'll give you some $15,000, 6 months of time, come up with something that works. And we have learned an awful lot about it. A lot of great ideas. Some have gone way, way beyond the prototypes. Others have just stayed as good ideas. But it was a really interesting exercise to see how we can use open data and how we can use the citizen science. And we have also built 3 of our own applications related to invasive alien species, protected areas, and air quality. And I'm going to say something in particular in relation to the invasive species. All the time you will see that my emphasis is about the reuse and the integration of citizen science with official data and therefore interoperability issue. So the one I'm going to focus is on invasive alien species. So we have an app that can collect some data. The data is collected in a database. It goes into a visualized on the web. But more importantly, then it needs to be validated. So data quality, enormously important issues. How do you validate observations of alien species, invasive alien species? Well, you can do it through the crowd. In our case, it's very important that we keep the official organizations involved and engaged in the process so that they participate in the quality control, because in this way, they will accept more easily the contributions that come from the public. If it comes as a parallel thing outside their control, they will just reject it. So you have to keep all the stakeholders involved, including the official bodies and the official scientific community. And then all of that data goes into a database that we maintain at the Joint Research Center, which is the official European database of invasive alien species. So there where you see the integration of the two. So interoperability is an absolutely crucial thing. And this is, my contribution to those who are really technically minded. If you don't understand it, that's great, because I don't understand it either. But basically, what we have done is that we have made sure that we can contribute through many different channels. And I will say something about it in a minute. So the most important things for us, particularly in this case, but also in the others, is not just make sure that we collect the data and that this data feeds into policy and the official data, but that we can integrate data that is collected by others. And that's why the interoperability becomes enormously important. And you can see here that at the moment we are collaborating with 2 other projects, IAS Tracker and Natosfera, because we have done a survey of 29 different projects in this domain, and out of the 29, only about 6 or 7 had actually data that could be used, and only 2 or 3 are data that was open. And so that says something about also the different processes. So what is happening is that what you see there in that light shaded yellow is the data that is collected through the official sources. So these are the agencies in Europe that are collecting around Barcelona the data on invasive alien species. And here in green, you see the data that comes from citizen science. And of course, the very interesting thing is when you combine the two, because then you can see that, for example, the official data is not collecting much data south of Barcelona, but that is a kind of heavily populated area, and there's a lot of people engaged, and that's how the combination of the two really works. What is important is that the information is collected and is validated together, and it works together through the way. That's how you ensure that the contribution of the public is really integrated into the policy process. So how do we share the data? Well, and how do we contribute to GEOSS? In essence, all the data that we collect is open source. All our apps are open source, the data is open source, and it goes into a catalog of the European Commission on data. And this catalog is harvested by a bigger catalog of public open data in Europe, which in turn is harvested by GEOSS. So in essence, we have created a filière of catalogs that are all interconnected. So as long as you put something into one catalog and that feeds the others, then you're in good shape. So you don't need to sort of send the same information multiple times around the world. And here is an example where through GEOSS you can find both the data that comes from our mobile app and the data from the official sources. So you can find both. And that's why it's important that these two always work together. So as I come to the conclusions, we know that there is a lot of interest in citizen science, which is a good thing. We are very grateful that also our policymakers, in a way, they're feeling the pinch, that they realize that they're increasingly getting disconnected from the public, and therefore they think that citizen science is really good to motivate. But at the same time, in a way, it's not just a question of educating the public in doing science, it's also a question of educating the policymakers in really giving up some of their power and reconfigure the process through which the public can meaningfully participate through all the stages of policy and not just at the end as a kind of token exercise. We must also make sure that, therefore, we don't squander the opportunity by raising high expectations that then we cannot meet. And that happens both for the public, raising expectations that wonderful things will happen if they send all these photographs of the rubbish in their street and then nothing happens. But at the same time, we don't raise high expectation of the policymakers that everything will be wonderful and you don't have to do anything. Don't worry about it, and they'll love you to bits. So that's, in a way, part of a challenge. And of course, interoperability is very important to make sure that there is reusability of all this excitement about citizen science. I've used this kind of metaphor of the fireworks because we see hundreds of citizen science projects. Really great excitement. And though like big fireworks, they just die. The data disappears. Often communities get disillusioned because, some bright people have come, they've done their PhD, published their papers and buggered off. And basically that nothing happens. Therefore, it's very important that instead you build a framework where things are sustained, data is maintained, is well documented. And if in 3 years' time you want to do a similar project in the same area, you can go back to the data that was collected 3 or 4 years ago to look at what has changed. So that's enormously important. It's not just the now, it is understanding the process. And that's why also we need to make sure that that data is well managed. And with that, I'll finish. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you for raising these important themes of authoritative data and citizen science and many of the considerations that are important in those particular kinds of projects. Our next speaker is Dr. Stefan Fritz, is the leader of the Earth Observation Systems Group. He joined this group in 2007, and since then he has become the initiator and driving force behind the GeoWiki.org and the GeoWiki Mobile, a global land cover validation tool based on Web 2.0 that aims to investigate and reduce the uncertainties in global land cover data using crowdsourcing. He is the principal investigator of the European Research Council-funded consolidator grant research project Crowdland that assesses the potential of using crowdsourcing to improve data on land cover, land use, and change. He is also one of the leads of the GEOSS Citizen Science Work Program. So welcome.
Thank you very much for this very nice introduction. Reading the bio. I would like to congratulate you all that you're still here. It's a marathon we're doing here without any break. And you're still sitting here and I can see you're still interested. That's amazing. And you're even still interested here listening to me, and I have to talk after Max Galia. He has already said all, so I don't know anymore what to say. In particular, the point he made on giving up power of the authorities. I think this is a really important one. And I just want to tell you, I had exactly that experience in this LandSense program, which I'm also coordinating, where we had one planned demo case in so-called Klosterneuburg, that's just outside Vienna, very conservative. It was about a tree cadastre where we try to involve citizens in monitoring the tree health and the phenology. And they said, very interested, we get a free app. Come here, you can do it. We had the first meeting, they said, yeah, it's fine. They have an extremely good, very well documented tree cadastre there with age, with species, really interesting information also for school kids to learn about trees. And they said, you can do everything, you can build the app, but don't tell the people, don't let them complain about when a tree is becoming dead or when we're supposed to cut the tree. This you're not allowed because it gives us too much work and we cannot handle it. And this is exactly against the initial idea of empowerment of the citizen, that they don't just learn about the tree, but they also want to be involved and have some action happening according to, when a tree is dead and when something really needs to happen. So that's a clear example of, giving up power, and it's not an easy process. And I think there's still a lot of work which needs to be done. And I think also if in the call text, it's written citizen empowerment, if Europe is really serious about that, this actually means a lot. And it's not so easy to give up power. So I couldn't emphasize this more. But coming back to lessons and we observe what I was originally, I think, asked to talk about by Juan, that's something I want to mention here, but then I was at the same time asked by Crystal, and thanks anyway to both of you for organizing this really important session. I should also talk about experience of citizen science and crowdsourcing projects. So I will try to mix the two, and I will try to be a little bit fast that you're getting your well-deserved break as well. Maybe we can have a very short one anyway. But anyway, as you can see, a lot of this work is not done by myself. It's a big group of people, and Ian McCallum is also there, sitting there in the end. And you can also ask him some questions if you have them after the talk. A lot is around what we are doing, the the GeoWiki platform, which we have been developing since 2009, and it is really initially about land cover information, displaying it, but we've, in the meantime, run a lot of campaigns. And just to give you a little bit of flavor, there was this claim that half of the world's biofuels could be satisfied using marginal land globally. We got the data set, and we couldn't believe it that there was so much marginal land available that you could satisfy half of the world's transport fuels with biofuels, which could grow on this marginal land. And we found in many cases that this land was not marginal, it was not available. Probably food crops are grown there, or feed is grown there. It's clearly seen, and we run this crowdsourcing campaign. And we downgraded these initial estimates of these large, massive marginal land reserves quite drastically in one of the scenarios, which shows that there is a really strong contribution citizens can make. What we used as incentive here was co-authorship of a paper as one example that creates a really interesting incentive, especially for students to participate in data collection. This was all done on Google Earth imagery. We also did some gamification. One was called Cropland Capture. It was very simple. It was just about deciding if you can see cropland, yes or no, and we build a database of cropland existent and non-existence globally. Another thing we did actually with this was very much related to Humanitarian OpenStreetMap's activity. So hello, Mikkel, nice to meet you again. And this was about damage assessment in Haiti. We run actually an exercise which was partly funded also by ESA, where we tested if we could see damage with a before and after image. We worked with Cristiano there in this, and it was really very successful. Also, the Humanitarian OpenStreetMap community helped there. It was just the question, do you see damage of a building in this before and after image? So you just imagine a before and after image and you see the difference. Yes, no, yes, no. And we learned that if you have like 6 independent people looking at it, you can say with a very high confidence that there is really damage at this location. It's extremely interesting, and there's a lot of potential to build up on this picture pile which we've been developing. Another thing we've been doing is trying to bring Earth observation also to the ground, specifically on land cover land use change. We are mimicking the LUCAS, the land use area frame sample, which is carried out every 3 years in Europe with 202,000 points distributed all over Europe, in Austria being 5,000, and yeah, or to also 8,000 depends, changing a bit sometimes. But anyway, the idea is to really understand also the quality. How good can citizens provide reliable land use, land cover information? And if we know the quality is high, and if we learn what type of land cover citizens are particularly good at observing, such as soil sealing, for example, such as build-up areas, such as roads, then we know what there could be some potential. If we don't know that, we're always left in the dark. We're running actually a campaign at the moment in Austria called PhotoQuest Go, and we have collected 600 points, and they are very widely distributed, and it will be in the television next week, so we are expecting a big peak also in the contributions. And another thing you've been asking was, how do we maintain the contributions? How do we keep the retention rates? I think this is really important for lots of projects. But for some things, we don't always, and we should be aware of that, need continuous engagement. I think it's great and I think it's good, but we should not always have our expectation too high that each project has to be continuously maintained. Sometimes it's good enough to do it in a one-off, and sometimes it's really important to have continuation. Here there are some examples of these land use area frame photographs we are getting. They are actually, in many cases, very similar, and we now introduced a very interesting feedback system. So basically, when the person uploads a photo, we can check it in a viewer if the quality is good. And here we use a very small incentive, which is €1, 1 point. It's just symbolic, because it takes you really long to go there. They go there with a bike, they go there on a tour, they have fun, they go out to the fresh air. It's like playing Pokemon Go. But we also want, demonstrate symbolically there's something there. So once you're there, you lock your €1. Once we have seen that the quality is good enough, we say, now you have your €1. Many times we say, thanks for the contribution, you've done a great job, however, you can still a little bit improve. And what is happening? The people are learning. And I think learning in citizen science and giving people feedback as quickly as possible, near real time, is critical to get good quality. And this is what we learned actually in this project. So now coming to LandSense. I have one slide earlier than the other one, but anyway, LandSense is really about this citizen observatory. It's one of the 4 funded observatories. Debra is also, as she has said, leading together with Drew one on Grow. This is LandSense. This is about land use and land cover monitoring in so-called 7 different pilots and 3 thematic areas. And our overall goal there is really to improve remotely sensed information. It has already been said, where could citizens make a big contribution to GEO? And this is partly, of course, on the calibration and validation side. And also what we're trying to do is really bring Earth observation closer to the citizen, especially the now freely available Sentinel data, 10-meter data, where you can actually do very interesting change detection. And of course, lowering the costs, that's always a big issue, and try to create business opportunities. 17 partners, 9 countries. There is this Landsat engagement platform, which Andreas has already talked about in great detail, so I don't have to go into detail there. But here also the idea is to create something sustainable with having this federation, having this single sign-on, which I think is a really big important component of it, where your barriers to register are really low by giving you different ways of registering. I think this is critical here. But we're also trying to engage with the so-called stakeholders, building this ecosystem around citizens, policymakers, NGOs. So we have them all represented. We're also working, for example, in Spain actually with BirdLife. So there is some nice connection to what is happening with respect to JRC's activities. And the idea would be then to have this engagement platform where, for example, an NGO like BirdLife could run independently a campaign on, for example, monitoring habitats of birds along the coast. And they could run their own campaign. They can set up their own sample of points, and we would then, in this engagement platform, provide all the necessary tools needed to do that campaign. A lot in Landsens is built around these so-called services, where we're also engaging companies, and the idea would be that these services can be continued beyond the lifetime of the project. One important one is this change detector. So with Sentinel data, as I have mentioned, you can now really do very interesting change detection, and the idea would be to deliver, and we have done some initial tests, hotspot alerts where land cover, land use is changing. For example, BirdLife and Friends of the Earth, the NGOs are really interested in that service, as well as, for example, IGN France. They are trying to update their authoritative data, their national maps for France, also now using citizen science, and they are also now starting to use OSM tools, actually, to also potentially engage the OSM community. I want to say a little bit more now, so before I come to the GROW, about these demo cases, just to make them complete. So another demo case we have beside the one mentioned, which is in Spain on habitat monitoring, and also we have something in Indonesia specifically on forest habitat monitoring. We have one around urban dynamics and green space monitoring. So green space monitoring in Vienna. Vienna welcomes us very much, in contrary to Klosterneuburg, where we gave up. We got an email from them saying, you cannot do this tree thing. We feel threatened because the citizens become too much empowered. So we gave up on that. We continued in Vienna, where we're very welcome. We are doing green space monitoring there. I think it's really important also with respect to the smart cities concept. There is the claim that each individual in Vienna should have within 250 meters reach to green space, and there is a very challenging and ambitious project now on regreening some areas in Vienna to make this happen, and we are providing some of the tools for that project. And here we are combining Earth observation, the green space, for example, NDVI in cities, how is it changing, but also the emotions of people they have to this green space. What do they like about the green space? Do they prefer trees or do they prefer grass? And so on. GROW. So that is a very interesting project which engages growers, and it has already been mentioned all around Europe, really having the growers at the center, the soil, the growers, and the scientific part of that is to have low-cost soil moisture sensors distributed to these very enthusiastic growers, stimulating also this existing ecosystem and network, and then engaging them in this low-cost soil moisture measurements, using that then as validation and calibration data, again, for Sentinel-1 data. There's working together with the Technical University of Vienna, in short, but ask Debra for more details. This project has also already been mentioned. This is basically now giving us some money to finally work together. As we have seen in previous funded observatories, there hasn't been much interactions between these observatories, and now we have the chance to work in all these mentioned observatories really together, and to also make sure that there is some data consistency, that there is some data cataloging happening where Juan is responsible for, and that we can really mainstream citizen science more in Europe. So a lot has happened in the US. The US citizen science is much more formally established. In Europe, there's still quite a lot of work to do. So we want to contribute to that process, to mainstream really citizen science as such. And I think I don't want to go too much into detail here, but it's really about building this citizen science ecosystem, raising awareness, creating accessibility, acceptability, but also the sustainability element of citizen observatories. Now I come just in the last 2 slides, and then I'm finished, to the lessons learned from the existing activities we've been running together with lots of partners, specifically touching upon quality. I think the really critical thing is that if citizen science data can be trusted and has sufficient quality, then it has the potential to be used much more formally as an official kind of data stream within all sorts of data streams, other like authoritative data streams. So what is really important there is that the clarity of the task is very clear. The citizen knows what he is supposed, or what he can collect. The more difficult the task, of course, the less quality you will get. Then there is this element of near real-time learning, which I have already mentioned. I think that is critical. The more real-time it can get, the better. Feedback on communication with the citizen is absolutely essential and important. What is also many times very useful is to have independent multiple observations of the same kind of object and point. And this also has been mentioned, so I can just summarize. The fitness per purpose is really important. So some of the citizen science data might be sufficient for one specific question, whereas for something else it's simply not good enough. So quality is key, and there we really need to make an effort also understanding and documenting the uncertainties around it. Co-design, as we know, and we've many times mentioned, heard today already, is important. Then we should also be open about what citizen science can do and what it cannot do. It needs to have a certain element of fun, and of course, repeating also what Max said, citizens want something back. Clearly, if you don't give them something back, it's doomed to fail, your citizen science project. And also, I think it's important, and this we've already heard many times, the standardization, the harmonization element, to think about that from the beginning once you start the project is essential. And try to make, of course, as much as you can, respecting privacy issues, make your data free and open. So in summary, there is the massive potential of citizen observatories and citizen science. It needs to be attractive. The incentives need to be clear. And if we can mainstream citizen science, we can have many, many benefits. Thank you.
Great. Well, first of all, I want to extend a big thank you to all of our speakers who I think between the 4 of them have really hit on many, many, many of the key themes and considerations for citizen science and for GEO to be considering. We're going to turn now to the question and answer session portion of our section. I also just wanted to make a comment. We aren't locking anyone in the room. There is coffee and other things available. Please feel free to duck in and out as need be. We are relatively informal here, as I've said before. And the idea is just to continue with our questions and our discussion until we're finished. So I'm actually going to start off with a question that came in during the last session, but I felt like several of the speakers touched on this, and it seemed like a good place to start. So from Twitter, we had a question that said how to handle data quality issues on citizen observatories. And obviously, several of our speakers touched on this issue and gave some thoughts, but I'd like to maybe give them the opportunity, maybe starting with Anne, to give us a bit more in-depth thinking on where we are. I think this is a very common question, particularly when dealing with those who haven't interacted with citizen science as much, and so it would be a good place to start. And you can just speak into the mics on the front table.
How to handle data quality in citizen science. So as I stated in my talk, I don't think it's a question of improving practices. I think the practices are already being done. And there are actually a number of research papers that you can find by searching for data quality in citizen science that talk about mechanisms for validating citizen science data or common practices. Andrea Wiggins led one, Amy Freitag led another. I think what we need is standardized documentation of data quality practices. So thinking about what this looks like, it could start by having organizations like the Citizen Science Associations encouraging all different types of citizen science projects to add a web page where they talk about what they do in terms of data quality, beginning from training participants, some targeted recruitment in some cases, it's through processing the data itself, assessing it, and then also documenting it, uploading it to different repositories, different catalogs, and then from that kind of trying to standardize it, working, I guess, with data catalogs themselves as well as different databases of citizen science projects, and again, umbrella organizations and others to come up with sort of, I would love to see like a Creative Commons license deal for talking about data quality. So you could almost put a different badge on your project page saying we do validation in this particular way that was recognizable by a lot of different stakeholders in different communities. That would be my end goal.
Any of the other panelists want to make a comment?
Well, I would have to, I mean, Globe's got, Lord, over 56 protocols for measurements. And the thing I'm always struck by is the nature of the data is not consistent. I mean, when you go to measure, you know, the basic meteorological variables, the character of the data is different than when you're taking soil samples or when you're doing land cover or when you're doing water quality. And so, to some extent, you have to, you know, fit the quality assurance to the specifics of what you do. Now, it's good to have generic standards, but you also have to look very much. The other simple fact is, for a number of things, I think ultimately what we're counting on, besides training, is the crowd part of the crowdsourcing. Mm-hmm. If you have enough data of variables that are interrelated, enough monitors of the water quality going down the same river or through the same watershed, enough monitors of an airshed, you begin to be able to improve the quality of the whole simply because you can look for consistency, outliers stand out, you can examine them. You don't generally, with the quantities of data we're trying to get, have the human ability, have the money and time to send somebody checking on every single one.
I'd just like to make the point that I don't think that there is anything different for projects involving the public than there are for any good project. And in fact, it's often used as an excuse that the data is, oh, it must be poor quality because what do they know? But there's just enough to see how many scientific papers have been retracted because they were fakes. Or the findings were dodgy because the sponsor wanted the finding to come out in a different way. So there is a generic issue of good quality of work. And citizen projects involving the citizens are no different.
Right, I'd like to turn it over to the audience.
Yeah, and listening to both the lightning talks and the extraordinary presentations that you brought to bear, I'm wondering if we're at a point where finding another category in addition to citizen science is going to be useful, because I reacted to a number of your talks with the idea that there were people out there who might contribute once and never again to a database, maybe dilettantes. There are others who were really dedicated sort of hobbyists. But there's also this group that may have despaired of finding employment in the traditional scientific community, but spends all the spare time outside of whatever their job is doing science. Those people are scientists, and I wonder if there is a way to either incorporate or develop this notion of a bivocational scientist. someone who understands that not every university has a research grant that will bring them on board. Not every agency has an extra position for that one extra smart person that wants to do science. Do we really have the possibility that there are bivocational scientists out there that are using all the same techniques that any scientist would use? They're just paying their bills by, I don't know, selling stocks or doing something where they were able to use their capacity for math in a different field because there happened to be a market for it.
Any takers?
Stump the panel.
You go ahead.
That's a challenging one. No, I fully agree. I mean, if this could be established, I think this would be great. I just want to make a little bit another point, which is along those lines. So what we have been also doing with respect to making sure that there is enough quality is we've been continuously kind of also checking. So we try to, also this is I think a very important element of gamification. So once you start to gamify, you have to link your reward system to the quality. So the better the quality, for example, the more points you get. And then you get trained to provide quality. But what we've been doing along the lines of giving some acknowledgement to the citizen scientists, so we started with a so-called certificate. So in this GeoWiki one, you contribute now to some of these campaigns and you have reached sufficient quality, you get a certificate. Okay, this might not at this point mean that much and it's not yet a degree, but it's the start. It's the start to recognize that you have contributed to something really important. And this is showing in this certificate that this is acknowledged to some degree. So I think it's an extremely good idea to try to move into that direction to have this kind of citizen scientists and to maybe formalize this more.
All right.
Can I just make an additional comment? I think that the citizen science is a broad label under which you find lots of different activities. And in a way, it is convenient that we lump everything under this category because it just gives it strength. But we shouldn't think that there is only one thing. As Leah, when she started introducing, said, well, you go from crowdsourcing, where it's also still active. You also go to other forms of sort of analysis of data provided by the public, even in passive ways. So when you do analysis of social media, et cetera, to more deliberate forms of participation in scientific projects that again go from just collecting the data to co-designing, analyzing. There are various levels of participation. And so it's a very broad category. And I think that, we should recognize those differences. So the point that you're making is valid. But again, within that differences, you will find that there are scientists who are engaged in doing these projects. There are volunteers. And in the past, before the professionalization of science, science has been developed by amateurs. Everybody was an amateur, from the priests who were doing observations to the mariners who were out at sea, et cetera, et cetera. They were not professional scientists. And it's just that after the Second World War, we have gone through this process that, you need to be certified and a professional scientist, and you're in and you're out. But before that, it wasn't like that. So I think that all of these need, in a way, to be considered when, we start trying to say, well, really, you are a scientist, admit it. You're not really the public, So there is that sort of kind of, again, sort of us, we are the expert, we know, then, they don't, but, you're a good guy, I know. Sort of there's that kind of element there.
This seems to me like the moment to make a point I should have made earlier, and that is the wonderful thing about the students is their motivation is the idea that they are contributing to the adult world. That even though they're a little kid, they're making a meaningful contribution of information about the environment. And that seems to be, they are not motivated by the idea that, I'm going to get a better science education. But they're very much motivated about the idea of making a contribution. And we do in Globe have an honor roll, and we're trying to think even more intensively about how particularly to acknowledge the teacher and how the teachers have done well. And but this step, I love it. And actually, I had a friend had me come to lunch and talk to him about all of this, and what he came back with was, we need something that you can then put on your resume, where your participation is then made a part of your resume, and that can help you in the job search or whatever.
Just a quick reminder to the panelists to please speak into the mic as much as you can so that our participants on live stream can fully understand and hear what you're saying. I'm going to move on to a question from the audience.
This is specifically for Stefan. I was really curious. I work with the Globe Observer project that Dixon mentioned, the app that involves, among other things, taking pictures right now of clouds and sky, but we are doing a land cover part of that coming soon. I was just really intrigued by how you do the real-time feedback with your land cover photographs to give that meaningful real-time feedback. Just a little bit more detail about how you do that.
Yeah, thanks for the question. So the way this works is we have an app, and there is a point where, if you go to that point, you are asked a number of questions, including 4 photographs and the land cover you are documenting. That's following this kind of Lucas protocol. Once you upload, so in most cases, and in Austria, if you are kind of online, the data, once you have taken the picture and you have documented the land cover, gets immediately on our server. So we see it in an interface. So we know this person X may actually anonymize the people, that we are not kind of influenced by their name or whatever. We can then say this person has at this location. So the location comes, we see it on a map, we see a new point coming in, we see where the original Lucas point was taken, so the authoritative data. We see the pictures, and we can compare the authoritative pictures with the new pictures coming in. We can do several kind of quality checks, one being if the picture corresponds to the land cover. So if the person takes a picture of a tree and he says, this is urban, something is wrong. We can say that he did probably not understand part of the questionnaire. So we can already do a quality check along that, but we can also check the location. And many times we get very good information thematically, but people are at the wrong location, but we see it because we can not just use the GPS signal, because that is not that precise, but we can exactly see where the person, because we have the orthophoto, we can see, does that picture match the orthophoto? And many times you have enough orientation and enough kind of features around you that you know that this is exactly the right place, and it corresponds to the official surveyor where we also have the picture. So that's the good thing. We can really do this quality check and then tell, yes, you've done it exactly as the official surveyor grades 100 points or €1, whatever.
But so you have that thing to compare to.
Yes, exactly.
And he's also got 100 people that do the real-time check, so for every single point.
Actually, that's a very good point, because somebody did that and she was really stressed. So one person is enough, but there's my turn, so we are changing turns. And next week is going to be my turn, and I'm already afraid because it will be on television next week. So probably I will be doing nothing else than checking. So yes, there of course there's a limited capacity on what you can check, but until now we managed to check at each point of the 500 contributions. So, and the good thing is that if the person, sees it was not correct, he has a real motivation. Ideally, he's still close to the point. So while he's still at the point, you can tell him, go a little bit closer, and you get it. That's the idea.
There was some security question earlier. And when you have children in your program, security becomes a very different thing. And so every one of the pictures that comes into Globe through its app on the phone that is from somebody who's anonymous gets checked to make sure that we're not, for instance, getting a naughty picture in there.
Mm-hmm. All right, on that wonderful note to end on, our next question.
Hi, Vangelis Gerasopoulos from National Observatory of Athens. I happen to coordinate one of the new projects of the European Commission on smart cities under the Air Planet framework, which focuses on air quality, disasters, and urban growth. So I was very much interested in seeing what We Observe is trying to do by bringing together some of these citizen observatories existing out there, and also some of the work that the GEOSS that Max has mentioned. And my question is there any frame foreseen within We Observe that upon which we can build? Because for us, citizen science is a small component of trying to explore, the whole Earth observation ecosystem, or any other ways and best practices that we can build upon in order not to start from scratch.
Yeah, I mean, one very important initial part we are doing in We Observe is these best practices. So that's, the first thing we are delivering. But there is another important component, which is this face-to-face meeting. A lot of We Observe is about engaging the community, about building the ecosystem. This would include inviting you to one of these events we're organizing. So the idea is to be really open and inclusive, and to invite everybody who is interested in bringing something into this observatory. So I'm very happy to invite you to one of these events, which is planned. The project is only starting in December, so it has not yet started. It will run,
Next question.
Yes, thank you for the wonderful presentations. My question is in continuation of something we started discussing. What is the profile of a citizen scientist? And if there are surveys that will help tell you, this is a nuclear physicist by day, but in the evening he watches birds, or a neurosurgeon and then he's looking at soil moisture, or this is taxi driver or farmer or something like that. Because first, it would be then possible to have some additional assessment of what kind of quality and what kind of serendipity you can get out of it. And second, now that you can target using social networks, you can target or engage different groups of people very precisely. Would that be used in citizen science to engage very specific groups in observations?
I think that's an interesting question. I think that, again, you have to look at the variety of projects that go under these categories. Because at one level, you have typically projects that address scientific questions, whether they are from astrophysics to land cover or land use. But you also have projects that, for example, are very much community-led. You suspect that there is some pollution in the water around you or in the air around you, and therefore you involve the community to do some measurements. And in some cases, the community that tries to recruit scientists to then provide some mechanism to check that. So again, you have a spectrum of different type of projects. And therefore, you will have a spectrum of different people who want to participate for many different reasons, because they care about their community, they care about their environment, or they are scientifically curious, driven, etc., or they're students, whatever. So you have a whole range of motivations. And, it was interesting that you were saying, well, through social media, we can target them. Which is a good way of thinking about it. But at the same time, this is also a voluntary process. They need to want to be engaged. And what is important, as I said, that they also feel that they have ownership of the process, of the product, and that they see that there is something that is coming back from their engagement. So all of these things have to come into being, and it's not just what their curriculum vitae is and whether they are the appropriate potential member of that group. There may also be something like that you want to target particular things. We have seen the fact that some of the most successful projects, when you're looking about sustainability, are those who build on existing networks of groups that exist, like fishermen. Or people who are beekeepers, or so there are a network of communities that pre-exist, if you want, this process, and then that you enable in a way to participate into a project that is related to them. So there's all these combinations that needs to be put into consideration. Does that make sense, Sam?
That does make sense. I absolutely agree with that. I looked at this, looking at this from a research perspective in terms of what motivates citizen science volunteers and who are citizen science volunteers. In terms of the who are citizen science volunteers, it does vary from project to project. A couple early studies showed that for Galaxy Zoo, for example, which is a crowdsourcing astronomy project, volunteers are white men in their late 20s to early 40s predominantly. In environmental monitoring projects that are conducting research during the same time, they are older white women. Usually they're retired, usually they're very educated. And this varies from project to project, which makes Max's point about working with the communities that your project is targeting really, really important. In general, I see two models of successful engagement between projects and volunteers. One is when projects and research questions are co-designed in real partnerships between local communities and scientists or other leaders who jointly decide what is important to study and how to study it. And the other case is when there is an existing network or hobbyist group and citizen science is sort of something that they can do because it aligns with their other activities. So eBird is an example of a citizen science project that has engaged millions and millions of birders around the world. I think it's what we have in terms of big citizen science data. And they've done that because they gave birders tools through their digital species checklists to make birding more fun, more enjoyable, and easier.
All right, I'm going to turn to a question from online at this point. The question is, any plans to archive citizen observatories and make them available in one place for easy access and interdisciplinary activities? And I think this speaks to, again, a common question that we often receive in these forums and touches on what many of you have pointed out, which is sustainability. So feel free to expand on this question into diving a little deeper into what are the next steps for continuing to make these projects sustainable and ongoing.
So from a globe perspective, with 22 and a half years of citizen science data from these primarily schools, it's all there. It's all online. It's all openly available. And here I'll go a little off what I think the program and NASA maybe are ready for, but there are over 1,700 water quality monitoring volunteer groups in the United States. Their data needs to aggregate to really be as powerful as it might be. And a system like Globe, I don't have the right to offer it up, but it seems to me, given that there's a lot of standardization in what you do because there's a limited number of ways, either sensors or sample kits, to make water quality measurements. So if you're following the manufacturer's instructions, in effect, you have the same protocol. And it would be nice to open it up, since one has a data set already doing that, a data system already doing it, and begin to look at, well, you've done something for a limited period of time or in a limited way. How can you take advantage of some more larger scale process to put your data in and know that it'll be kept, and kept indefinitely, and kept, in this case, by a U.S. government-sponsored archive?
This is Lee. I'm just going to do a quick comment onto Dixon's. In terms of the water monitoring, there's the USA Volunteer Water Monitoring Network, which is working to coordinate all those 1,700 groups. But in addition, COASI, which is the consortium of hydrologists in the U.S., is now exploring, they already provide other hydrology data, exploring the possibility of integrating citizen science data into their repositories.
From my side, I think that there is now an increasing, I think that there is a difference between projects that have a long history and have started with protocols that have developed over time and can provide that framework, to the galaxy of very recent citizen science projects, which are more this, like fireworks, where there, I think that now we are coming to realize that they need to be, from the beginning, organized well in terms of data management, in terms of describing the process, describing the project, documenting it, documenting the data, and then archiving the data when they've finished the project, And you also need to have a mechanism to cite that data. So what we are doing at the moment, certainly in the data that we store ourselves, is to also include this data cite dimension, because that is an incentive for all those who have contributed to building the data set to have recognition of that work. And we have found that often the scientists are the worst offenders when it comes to open data, because it's my data, right? And they don't want to release it until they have completely exhausted. Whereas if they have, some degree of recognition for the work that is done, and publishing data is as good as publishing a paper, then that creates a good mechanism. But so therefore you need to have citation of the data. So all of this is good data management practice, which I think that gradually now we are start seeing coming into being also in this myriad of new projects, which will make them reusable and more sort of sustainable over time. I think that it's unfortunate that over the last few years, these have not been there, and we have seen many cases of great excitement about all these projects, and then they've gone. The URL has moved, the data has disappeared, and et cetera, et cetera. So, I think it's a process of change now.
I can't resist jumping in and saying the lessons you just described that need to be learned in the world of space science at NASA, those exact lessons had to be learned. I mean, people used to go out, do their experiment, not invest in the data system, probably not even analyze because they were into building the next instrument. And we had to go from there to the sense of a community value, which, rather bluntly, the earth science community has gotten to with things like the IPCC, where everybody understands that I don't get to sit on my data. I want it out there because that's really my contribution.
I just want to make one more point to what the question was originally. So can this data be found in one place? And I think there we are not quite yet there. And I think the ideal scenario for GEO would be that all this citizen science data gets registered. So there's a catalog, the catalog gets registered. You then search for it and then you find it, but finding is not good enough. What you really want is visualize it. You want to see it in one place all together. The water data, the forest data, the bird data, the butterfly data, whatever, has been collected in one place. And then it, I think, becomes extremely interesting also to do further analysis, to really combine the data and blend the data and create new products out of citizen science. And I think this could be a vision for us to where we could try to get into the future.
Yeah, I was going to say the exact same thing. You just beat me to it. I think the Europeans actually do this better than we do in the U.S. But, we have 4 databases of citizen science projects here. None of them collect information on where the citizen science data is. And we have no catalog of citizen science data. I think that's something that's really sorely needed.
All right, going back to the audience.
So I was just going to say that there is actually an example in Scotland of the National Biodiversity Network Scotland Atlas, which is based on a similar project in Australia. I've just tweeted the link, so if you look at that, then you'll see the sort of thing I'm talking about. I wanted to come back to Max's point, though, about tokenism, which I thought was really interesting. Is there a way that we can support policymakers so that they don't take that leap, if you like, or they don't fall into tokenism of using citizen science and then trying to get citizens involved in policy making when they're not really involved? How can we support them not to do that?
I think that this is a generic issue of public participation rather than just citizen science. There is a broader question. And I think that it's very much up to us as a community and us as citizens to basically keep an eye for this more tactical or populist approach to how good public participation or citizen science or et cetera, you find this all the time in every walk. Sort of politicians love to hug little children and sort of be taking photographs and doing good things, but it's all a facade, by and large. And the risk is also that, in a way, talking about citizen science and citizen participation, it is a tactical, and so you have to keep them to account. I see in our own practice that we get a lot of increasing interest from our senior management about citizen science. And, in a way, we have to balance attention because they want to have citizen science now. This next year is the year of cultural heritage. We need to have an app. Right. What for? And you need to start asking the hard questions and say, well, what is it that you expect out of it, and why do you think that people will want to participate, and how does that fit into all these other mechanisms? So you need to start asking these questions until either they fire you, which can happen, yeah. So they get very sort of fed up. Well, you're obviously somebody who doesn't want to do what you've been told. And so there's a balance there, but it's a form of education. You have to educate your management, and you have to educate, the hierarchy. But that is what we all have to do in our own different walks of life, yeah. So I don't think that there is a one answer, but I think it's a generic answer about how you address these kind of issues.
All right, we'll take one or two more questions from the audience, and then we're going to move on to our discussion section.
I would like to ask you a different question from what have been heard today. I'm curious to know what is the panelist opinion or idea about the connection between the citizen science and the crowd's wisdom, which is, I think, very important because citizen science is not only observation, but sometimes also opinion.
Does anyone want to make a comment?
Well put.
I guess I would add to that something that we didn't actually touch on today, but this is, and I was going to touch on it in my closing remarks, but I think it's actually relevant to the question that we just had, which is the point of maturation and the interest in this topic is not surprising given the group that we're sitting in today. But I was quite surprised when I turned on my television the other day and saw a proposed TV show that's about to start or has just started, all about crowdsourcing crime stopping. And having not seen any of it and having no idea where that's going to go, I think that very much speaks to what maybe perhaps you were trying to get at, which is what are the next steps in this and what are the limitations? We've focused very much on the science because that's where we're coming at it from at this event. But there is absolutely a potential life of its own that this idea could take on. I think I saw one more question in the back.
And I can't resist saying we've had a 4-part public television program developed over the last couple of years called The Crowd in the Cloud. And it's, I believe, available online.
Can I say something about that?
Yeah.
Let me add the geographical point of view. Local people know local things better. And this is actually the acknowledgement we are looking for in some of these citizen science projects. We are capturing local knowledge. There is no other way.
One more question.
Thank you. I am Mustafa Iptes, Director of International Hydrographic Organization, IHO. I would like to provide some short information regarding maritime citizens of crowdsourced activities. In that respect, as IHO, International Hydrographic Organization, we have established a crowdsourced bathymetric working group in order to provide guidelines for those who wish to provide bathymetric data around the world in simple way. And what is needed is only a GPS and the sounding system and also small logging, which might be possible to upload the available data by using internet to IHO data center for digital bathymetry. So crowdsourcing activities are getting more and more important in maritime domain as well, because we need more data. Any data is better than zero data. Only 10% of the oceans are now so-called known, comparing the Moon, Mars, and other planets. So we encourage to receive more data, data gathering, data maximizing as much as possible. And as intergovernmental organization, we try to introduce, advertise, and receive the available data from cruise line industries, from fishery boats, from super yachts, which is already as a kind of project prototype of ships. So we need crowdsourcing in all sense, including maritime domain. Thank you.
All right, so if we don't have any comments to respond to that, I'd like to ask the one final question, which is I'd like to sort of ask for a closing statement from each of the panelists. We are about to move to the portion where we want to refocus our attention on GEO's role in citizen science. What can GEO do for citizen science? What can citizen science do for GEO? And so I'd like to just ask each of the panelists for a short statement, and I understand you've touched on a lot of the themes that you think are important. So it's fine to repeat a little bit, but if you could really pull out one or two things that you'd like to leave the audience with, I'd like to ask you to do that. We'll start with Dixon.
Okay. Boy, good question. My satellite biases are going to come in here. We increasingly have the ability to model the Earth at very high resolution in space and time, and we have increasing needs to do so. Doing that in terms of practical measurements to go with that, I think makes citizen science essential. We are the complement to the more broad-based, lower resolution observations from space or whatever that GEO has traditionally been more about. And so I think, we need to become, or citizen science needs to become just an intimate part of that continuum.
Having listened to some of the presentations around SDGs, I think it would be really good if we could think also in the framework of GEO how citizen science, citizen observatories can contribute to the SDGs, and where the links to the existing ongoing activities with respect to what GEO is doing, tackling the different SDGs and looking at the indicators where Earth observation can contribute. We can equally ask the same question: where can citizen science contribute to the SDGs, plus where can citizen science plus Earth observation together, where you have improved, better validation, calibration data, contribute to the SDGs? And I think this is a really important central question, and I'm happy to actually continue some of those thinking and activities which, with a workshop we're going to have at YASA along those lines. So if you're interested in that, please get back to me.
Do you want to go first?
Sure. Let's going second or third, yeah. 3 takeaways, actually, only one of which was from my presentation. I think coordination is really important, especially around reusing infrastructure. So, for example, building apps based on OpenStreetMap, Humanitarian, Zooniverse does this really well. They have a single infrastructure that multiple research projects can leverage and use. Second key takeaway is power. There's a lot of local knowledge in citizen science. I would say, as others have said, that local knowledge is citizen science knowledge. And we need to be aware of power as an important issue, especially while working with different decision makers and researchers, and power underlying questions like data quality. And the third key takeaway is documentation for me, including documentation of processes and documentation of data.
All right, Max, that gives you the last word.
Well, I think that can only add to what has already been said by all of them. I think that, as we have seen, there are many facets of value. One is that you can really sort of have a global way of monitoring the environment, of monitoring what is going on, in alerting about things that go wrong around you. But in order to have that global outreach, we need to have good practices, documentation. We need to be able to maintain and store somehow this knowledge so that we can build it over time. And in a way, GEO can have that role as a global framework to make sure that all the projects at the local level are somehow made visible and reusable and contribute to this global knowledge. And I think that that would be a good role for GEO to play.
Great. Well, thank you. First of all, thank you to each and every one of our panelists. I think you really covered a huge range of topics today, including issues and questions for us all to think about. So thank you very much. I'm now going to turn the mic over to my co-organizer, who's going to move us into the discussion section. But if you first could give, yes, that was my next statement. Thank you very much.
Can we take a break?
Right. So it is clear that the remaining people here are the ones that are really, really interested. So please close the doors now to avoid anyone else to go away. No, I mean what I wanted to discuss with you and also with the co-organizers that are no longer here too, so even we have lost the co-organizers, is what to do next. Let me just say that I'm really, really happy that these 3 hours that we had, and what I'm really, really happy is this is recorded. So we have demonstrated that this group has some potential, so it's time to think what we are going to do. This idea of the Sustainable Development Goals, it's a very good idea. I have something in my slides, but let me just say that there are 3 objectives in principle now here in GEOSS. One is the SDGs, the other one is the climate change, and the other one is the risk management, no? And so on. This, if we manage to tell the plenary that we are focusing on these 3, we are in the picture. So that's definitely an approach. We have to understand that we are just a small part of a small thing, or of a big thing. No? There are many different activities, and we are just this one. So how we are going to be visible is one of the things that we need to think about, and this is exactly what links to what I just said about the SDGs and so on. Okay, so the initial exercise that we can do is to try and read the original description of this group and see what is in there. Well, the description, I did an effort to simplify the description, and it's still too long. But but anyway, it doesn't really matter because this is putting the thing into the situation, no? So let's just skip that. It's after that it says that there are focus on these groups, and let's look for key words here: standards and best practices. Exploration of linkages of citizens' data with GEOSS and the infrastructure, investigating on methods, doing demonstration pilots, synergies with the GEO activities, impacts on policy, and social innovations. That's what it says. And then there is another section that says activities for the period. So this should be more concrete. And actually, it seems to me a repetition of the same things, but some extra details. So we need to so what was foreseen for this period is try to stimulate participation, standards of best practice again, integration with authoritative data, environmental governments, case studies, showcasing, here at the bottom, that is kind of the same, synergies with other geo activities, linking with the existing activities, so complementary activities, discovery and access of citizen science projects. So we have some kind of a mandate of doing this. We can change it, but well, that's at least an orientation of this. The future plans, one thing that I would like to remind you is that in the website it says that there are 3 responsibles. One of them is in this room. The middle one, it's actually a person from the Commission that is no longer working on the Commission, is now working in the, well, it's the Commission again, but it's another Commission, no? The Environmental Agency. And also Uta Wen. The first thing that you observe, all of them are European. That's not good. We need to fix that. This is one of the first things that we can try and do. So look for US, Europe, Australia, Asia, Pacific, I don't know. More representative that has a broader scope. This is definitely something that we have to do. Also, it says there are resources. I don't understand much where these 20 million come, but it is clear that at least the we observe is a contribution from the European Commission to help here in this group, at least partially. I mean, it's mentioned in the description of action, so it's something that we can easily justify in what we are going to do. That's a good thing. Okay, then we have other things that you have to remember. We have the OGC involvement in citizen science, and I believe I have it here. So they have a group, a domain working group, they call it. We also got some conclusions similar to conclusions that we could have here. The need for describing projects and cataloging projects, the need to share information, the need to scale up projects by applying interoperability. And the mosquito alert is my favorite example, but not the single one. And the single sign-on that at least was an idea that, since it's something that is technical, was floating around the OGC somehow. We have this cost action. This is another European founded project. This is about meetings. So the cost actions are financing meetings of people to discuss, working groups, and things like that. So this is another thing that runs in parallel with this group. And I wanted to make publicity of this session in the EGU that also talks about citizen science, and it's also a US Europe collaboration, so it's a good thing. Read about that. So probably the list of existing initiatives is partial because it's just my view, my local view. Let's call it that way. I put the existing initiatives there, no? The OGC, the cost action, the we observe, the architecture and interoperability pilot number 10 that is going to start soon, sooner or later, because they are moving the starting date, but I believe now they will not move it anymore. And sessions in the EGU or in the AGU, whatever. And then we have the list of activities that I try to, for this period foreseen, that I try to simplify here to the minimum expression. So, I stop here. This is what presumably was supposed to address, this group should address at the beginning. Probably we have the freedom to change it, but it could be useful. So how we are going to do this? Which is your favorite activity? Because there are too many. So let's start removing some, at least for the next year. The good thing could be to have something to present to the next plenary. So in some sense, do enough noise to be able to go to the plenary to tell them something, to elaborate some kind of a report or some kind of a tool, something that can be said on plenary. That could be definitely a success of this group. We could start by just this study about which citizen science activities can influence sustainable development goals. They are going to love that. No? But we can do other things. I mean, we can also ensure our presence in the plenary by going through the AIP. I don't know.
So, my favorite topic is now on a slide. And it's called within the action items. So what I have been thinking about, and I mean, my first involvement in GEOSS was AIP5. And what did we do in AIP5? We did single sign-on. The prototype and what we contributed was single sign-on. We did the same thing in AIP6. We proved that single sign-on would be an improvement for data sharing in GEOSS. Because you could use one infrastructure, one platform, or whatever you want to call it, to actually share free and open data, but also sensitive data, data that needs to be controlled that not everyone can have access to. So one platform to do it all. And to do the use matrices right. Yeah, you remember how use matrices used to be created? By the referrer tag. Now, if you come from the geoportal.org, then your referrer tag is geoportal.org, so that is a hit of you are one of those who are looking for geo information. Perfect. But if you bookmark the service endpoint, the URL, then guess what? The referrer is not earthobservations.org. Yeah, it's nothing. So calculating use matrices just by that is created wrong use matrices. So the stimulation was, how can we actually track or count that there is a user who is interested in this? And the idea was to have a very light login mechanism. So you log in once, and then you can hop to all the different resources provided by GEOSS, and then you can actually create right use matrices. So the question is now, I see it in AIP 10 again. What happened in between?
They implemented as I mean.
I would happily accept or happily be a happy man if that would actually have impact in GEOSS and be taken on, and that GEOSS in general would consider that yes, there is data that needs to be controlled, and yes, we need a platform or a system that supports single sign-on, even though we can make most of the stuff open and freely available, but still the same platform to use high quality data, commercial data, products that have been created with the base data, etc., etc. So, yes, so single sign-on, I would say, is a technical thing, but it should be discussed as a technical thing in GEOSS to build a system of systems that really is a platform or something where things come together. Thank you.
So real quick, I'm just going to make one announcement and then turn it back to the discussion. We're actually going to go ahead and turn the live stream off. And so for any of our audience who are tuning in via that method, I would invite you to participate in this discussion by reaching out to us rather than try to coordinate responses via Twitter or the chat room there. We're going to go ahead and end that. All of our information is available on Secure World Foundation's website as well as the GeoPlenary website. And I just want to thank you for joining us today. And if you have any questions or would like to further participate in the conversation, please reach out.